Hey, I'm Mr. Ghost. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Halloween Eve. It was extra dark that night. No moon, no star. Isaac and Tommy sat in the back seat. They both looked out their windows. The trees were crooked blurs. Their dad was driving fast, too fast. No one spoke. The radio was off. Engine hummed. Tires gripped the pavement. An occasional bump split the vibration. Otherwise, silence. Isaac's clown mask sat on his lap, his ridiculous long shoes wedged under the passenger seat. Tommy's football shoulder pads were like an added safety measure in case of impact. His helmet sat between his legs. It was Halloween, rather. It would be in about an hour. The night before is when things get scary. Something must be fed. If not, it eats on its own. Tommy looked towards Isaac, his skin pale like bone. He breathed shallow through his nose. This was Tommy's first time he had come of age this year. Isaac was 2 years older. The brothers never spoke of this night. No one did. Tommy tapped Isaac's arm with the back of his hand. Nothing. Just breathing. Eyes fixed on the trees. Tommy leaned forward. "Dad, can you put the radio on or something?" Tommy asked. "No," Dad said. "Why?" No response. "Mom, can you put the radio on?" Tommy pleaded. She sniffed a bit. She was crying. Glanced at Dad. He shook his head. "Then can I get one of your phones? It'll keep the volume down." "Tommy," Isaac croaked. "Come on, man. Come on, what? Shut up. We're just together right now. We're always together." "Yeah," Isaac sighed, returning his gaze to the window. Tommy looked at Isaac. Then Mom and Dad went to speak. Didn't. Eased back. Mouth shut. His lips pursed. Forehead tensed. A few moments passed. Tommy drummed his fingers on the helmet. "I don't get why we're wearing our costumes tonight. All the other kids are gonna see what I am. And it won't be a surprise tomorrow," Tommy said. Dad's hands gripped the wheel tight. The rubber squeaked under the pressure. "We're close," Mon muttered. A small nod from Dad. The car started to slow. Faint taillights glowed up ahead. Doors clunked shut. Dad pulled to a stop on the side of the road, behind an old minivan. It was the Hendersons' van. They had 3 kids of age and 2 toddlers, a decal of a stick-figure family. Holding hands clung to the rear window. Dad put the car in park and turned the key. His heaving sigh filled the silence. His right hand gripped the back of the passenger seat. He turned. "Don't be scared, we'll be fine," he said, looking back and forth between the brothers. "It's time." Isaac opened his door and lurched over. He vomited on the side of the road. Dad nodded and closed his eyes. Mom reached around the seat and rubbed Isaac's shoulder. Her eyes were swollen. Her face clung to her skull. Tommy's eyes narrowed. His cheeks flushed. He quickly slid on his football helmet. A single tear fell, obscured from view by the shadow of the face mask. Dad opened his door. The sound of crickets and distant voices of children rode in on the breeze. Isaac finished retching and weakly shut his door. He wiped his mouth with a loose napkin from the floor. "He'll get out on your side," Isaac managed. Tommy opened his door. He contorted just enough to fit the pads and helmet through the opening. His cleats clattered on the asphalt. Isaac followed clown shoes first. He stood up and wobbled, grabbing Tommy for balance. He slid on his mask, erasing his pallor. Mom shuffled to Dad's side. They led the way across the car-lined street, entering a worn path through uncut grass and weeds. Up ahead, a loose collection of jostling flashlight beams. The drone of hundreds of people. Murmurs. An occasional giggle. Tommy craned his helmet-clad head, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening through the moving sea of bodies. He saw kids from his school. Some were running around, others huddled around their parents. A fairy. A couple of witches. Another boy from his class dressed as a football player. "Damn," Tommy muttered, looking down at his costume. The older kids were gathered, mostly silent, like Isaac, others cracking jokes. None of the parents acknowledged each other. They all stared forward, towards something Tommy couldn't see. Dad gripped Tommy's shoulder and leaned down. Tommy turned to look at him. "Listen, follow your brother," Dad instructed. "Dad, what is this?" Tommy asked. "Just follow your brother." "Dad, why won't you take—" A bell split the night air. Dad and Tommy turned towards the sound. Dad stood up straight, patting Tommy's shoulder. Tommy looked at Dad. He nodded. Isaac's trembling hand grasped Tommy's other shoulder. "Let's go," Isaac said. The crowd parted. Kids filtered from the crowd, forming a line in the center. Tommy and Isaac took a spot in the line. Everyone was silent now. Tommy took a few steps into the open space next to the line. The town librarian stood near a bell at the front. About 30 feet behind her, a house. Small, one floor, drab boarded windows. A couple brick steps leading to the door. The librarian motioned to the door. A girl in a bunny costume stepped forward. She stopped halfway, glanced over her shoulder. "Go," someone said from the crowd. She did. Walked up the steps, knocked on the door. Nothing. She hurried down the steps and disappeared into the crowd. Whispers from the other kids. Exchanged glances from the parents. Next was an older kid. Grim Reaper. He did the same. Nothing happened. Tommy looked at Isaac. "Isaac, I don't get it." Isaac didn't look at Tommy. "You will," he whispered. One by one, 24 kids did the same and retreated to the crowd. The parents buzzed a bit. People shushed. Tommy and Isaac were sixth in line now. Isaac was crying silently. Tommy was too. The mask and helmet protecting them. The 3 Henderson kids were next. The first one went. It was Polly. The other 2 held hands tight. She knocked. Nothing. She returned to the crowd, blew a kiss to her siblings. Tears streamed down her face. Next was little Pete. He was the runt of the litter. A white sheet with the eyes cut out, dragged on the grass. He walked slowly, a tiny apparition. He knocked. A few moments passed. He started to turn. The door moved, hinges creaking. It opened, pure blackness inside. The cricket stopped. The crowd gasped. The remaining Henderson child screamed, tried to run to him. The librarian hugged her tight. She scratched and clawed, crying and drooling. The Henderson family hovered like ghosts from the crowd. Pete stood frozen. "You have to go, son," the Henderson father said through tears. "They'll be okay, right?" Pete asked. "Of course, buddy. We love you." Pete turned. He hesitated. The sheet heaved a bit. He stepped forward into darkness. The door slammed shut. A sickening cracking sound. Then another. Cracking sounds erupted all at once. The house started breaking and warping, folding inward. Dirt exploded up around the perimeter. The sound was deafening. About 2 minutes passed. Terribly long, but frighteningly quick. The house was gone. Just an empty lot, like it was never even there. The Hendersons fell apart. Screams, crying. The librarian released the child. She ran to her family. Tommy stepped forward and lifted a hand, went to speak. A hand grabbed him swiftly. It was Dad. "No," he said. Tommy looked around. Hundreds of people watched a family become unmoored. No one reacted. No one spoke. Only staring. Isaac slung an arm over Tommy's shoulder pads. The librarian struck the bell. Everyone turned and started retreating. Little Pete was gone. Dad and Mom led them back to the car. Doors slammed and engines burst to life along the dark road. Headlights beamed. Cars slipped into gear. Dad opened the back door. Isaac slid in. Tommy looked at the Hendersons' van, the decal. Dad looked too. Mom stopped and rested her hand on it. They all got in. Dad started the car. They started to drive. Tommy didn't speak. He looked to the empty lot. The Hendersons were still there, huddled in the darkness. My experience hiking at Golden Ears Provincial Park. I hope that my story can bring some entertainment to you and some therapy for me. I still have trouble trusting myself. I still don't fully believe what I saw, but I know what I felt. When I told my friend, he blamed it on me being delirious from fear and that it could have been a bear or mountain lion. I guess I didn't know what I saw, but it was nothing anybody could actually believe unless they experienced it themselves. I grew up in Western Canada, just outside Vancouver. a little under a couple hours drive to the Washington border. One thing about people from British Columbia is almost everyone goes hiking. The crime in BC isn't anything to raise concerns about. You only need to be more worried about bears, wolves, and mountain lions. It was the beginning of summer, June of 2020. Everyone was isolated and I was working from home. After being isolated for what felt like forever, I needed to get outside. While doing some research on hiking trails I hadn't yet been to, I discovered a trail called Golden Ears, which is still to this day one of the most difficult hiking trails due to its lack of maintenance. I was a very experienced hiker, even at 20, but none of my friends could come because they were all sick with COVID. I knew I should have waited till they felt better, but I couldn't stay inside a second longer. I should have just chosen an easier hike. But I didn't. I packed up my bag with my usual gear with the addition of bear mace because of the season, and 2 flashlights, one battery operated and one hand cranked. I always carried a backup flashlight and I'm grateful to this day for it. I made the hour's drive and saw from the road markers I was at the center point of the Washington border and my hometown. When I started the trail it was about 12 p.m. I usually leave my phone in my car because you never get a signal out there anyway, too many trees and mountains. I do carry an emergency radio if I really need to call for help. The trail I was on was an estimated 6-hour hike, which wouldn't be an issue, as it made a full circle and I would get home no later than 8 p.m. before it would get dark. I parked on the southeast end of the trail and started my way, following the yellow markings of my trail, and found some beautiful high cliffs with just the most gorgeous views. The weather was very forgiving that day, just beautiful, with no rain like we are used to out west. The way the lakes would look like beautiful twinkling gems and breathtaking scenery of the mountains and local fauna. As I moved deeper into the trail I started noticing some of the markings were fading and becoming harder to spot. This wasn't an unusual thing in hiking trails so deep in the mountains, but it did raise some concern. It felt like I was getting lost, but I kept persevering, checking my map and my compass to direct me instead of the markings. I would mark the lake I passed by so I would remember where I came from and where I needed to go. I think I got so worked up checking my map that I could no longer see any markings or paths. I thought this was a good time for a break. I got out some snacks and tried to relax myself. Keeping yourself together is crucial when you're lost. It is life or death, and any decision I made going forward had to be from a sane mind. As I packed up I heard the faintest noise through the trees, like a steam train that was far in the distance, but I blamed it on the wind and some hollow branches. My watch read 5 p.m. and I couldn't imagine that I had already spent 5 hours on the trail. I would have seen something by then, even with relentlessly checking my map. It literally felt as if someone had picked up and dropped me at a random point. I couldn't recognize anything around me. When I checked my map and compass I looked for anything that could be on the map. I needed to find higher ground. I saw a nearby incline and decided sometimes you have to get deeper in to really get out. When I reached the incline I saw in the distance what looked like a worn-out crossroads sign. There was nothing on the map that indicated there was a railroad of any kind, so I assumed it must have been some joke or mistake that nobody bothered to fix. When I decided that I really needed to turn back, I somehow lost my balance on what was sturdy ground and fell down the hill and rolled nearby to the tracks. The fall had broken my watch and it stopped at 5:13 p.m. and it was now golden hour, meaning I had less than a few hours before the sun would set. I hadn't thought to pack my climbing gear because I read there were no cliffs or rocks to climb in the trail. I still feel how panicked and stunned I was at how much everything was going wrong, but they don't teach you what to do when things go right. They teach you when things don't go according to plan. Curiosity might kill the cat, but I still approached the tracks because it was almost like I was supposed to see them. They looked worn out and they seemed to stretch on a while. Nearby was a small river that was flowing down north, so I decided to follow upstream until I found an incline where I could manage to climb it, where the tracks seemed to grow. Walking along the tracks it made it easier on my feet because of the flat surface. The sun was so far hidden behind the myriad of large trees and the abundance of mountains, it could have been still bright out, but I couldn't tell. I felt consumed in the forest. I was slightly hysterical, isolated, alone and barely armed. I was easy prey if anything caught me off guard. That's when things got even more strange. When I pulled out my flashlight and radio, my radio would only sound static or play old-timey style songs, like ones you would hear in a silent film. It was an old emergency radio my dad had given me, and it can tune into different stations, but it wasn't a time to play music and draw attention to myself. When I turned on my flashlight it flickered and would barely stay on. I assumed because I might have forgotten to change the batteries. I tried relentlessly to get the radio to call or relay my message, but it wouldn't stop playing that same stupid tune whenever I turned it on. I kept my radio off in hopes that when I reach higher ground, the signal would improve. I switched to my hand-cranked flashlight, but it wasn't exactly a quiet fix. It just drew attention to my location. I made haste in fear of attracting any sort of predator. I was extremely out of my element and comfort zone. I could feel all sorts of eyes watching me as I made my way up the tracks and against the stream. The sound of the water trickling was the only comfort I had. After about a kilometer of walking, I heard a branch snap behind me. I instantly turned around because I was walking on a railroad, not the ground. When I turned on my cranked flashlight, I saw two larger-than-life eyes blink at me, at the faintest figure of what I thought was a person, so I yelled out to them and it ran off. Possibly a deer, one might think, but deer aren't usually ones to stay for long after a noise is heard. They're one of the first to run. I continued up, convincing myself it was a deer, but something didn't feel right about the size of the eyes. I could see how big they glowed and I was barely 30 feet away. I could start to see the end of the tracks, so I was making progress. But I could hear low grumbling and the sound of leaves crunching in pairs, like someone was putting one foot forward and then the next, and it started to grow closer. I cranked my flashlight some more to see anything around me. I shook my bear mace and had it ready with the cap off. I continued forward and the stream had ended, my only comfort gone, and only tracks remained in the encompassing darkness of the whispering trees. I could finally see the end of the tracks was near, but it was pitch black and I couldn't make out anything. I started to lose hope so much that I was desperate to even find somewhere to hide. I wouldn't starve, but I didn't want to be something's next meal, paranoid from the sounds. I checked behind me with my flashlight almost every other second. As I was about 60 feet from the end, I heard a thud and crunching behind me. Call it a praise intuition, but I could feel something after me. I could hear the wind change as it ran and the ground thud as it moved. I didn't even think to use my flashlight this time. Turning around and I instantly used my mace. It definitely stunned whatever thing was behind me, but nothing could mimic the powerful screech it made as it ran off. My ears rang the rest of the night. I could see the faintest silhouette and there was nothing I could explain and sound sane of mind. I remember running so hard my lungs weren't even being used. I was just pure muscle and fear moving. The most scary thing about that night wasn't even the thing that stalked me. Once I reached the end of the tracks, I was back in the southeast parking lot, where my car sat untouched. I threw my shit in the back and started the car and left, not turning back. The next morning I went back with my friend to show him, and there wasn't a single trace of tracks. Just the bare mace I dropped outside my car. There have been reported drownings and deaths at that place that are unexplained, and I feel like it's those who follow the tracks down instead of up. Who knows? Maybe I really imagined it being there so long, and afraid. I just never want to feel like prey ever again. I feel a lot better telling my story now, even if it's to a completely random source. Thank you to whoever reads this and sympathizes with me. Today, a girl from BC who is now I was a park ranger at Black Hollow National Park. There are strange rules to follow. Have you ever followed a rule without knowing why? A rule that seemed pointless at first but carried an unspoken weight, a silent warning that made the back of your neck prickle. Some rules are there to protect you. Others exist to protect something else from getting out. I learned that the hard way. My time as a park ranger wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about guiding lost hikers, protecting wildlife, or enjoying peaceful nights under the stars. It was about survival, about obeying rules that felt less like guidelines and more like whispered prayers. At Black Hollow National Park, the rules weren't there to keep us safe. They were there to keep something else in. I never planned to end up at Black Hollow. It wasn't on my list of places to apply. I hadn't even heard of it before. But after months of job hunting, after sending out resume after resume and receiving nothing but polite rejections or silence, my phone rang. "We reviewed your application," a man's voice said, flat and to the point. "We'd like you to start immediately. No interview, no questions, no follow-ups, just a job offer dropped into my lap, like I had been chosen for something without knowing why. It didn't sit right, but I couldn't afford to be picky. My savings were drying up, and rent was due. So, I packed my bags, filled up my car, and drove into the mountains, toward a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to shift. The roads narrowed. The trees grew taller, denser, pressing in from both sides as if they were watching. By the time I reached the ranger station, I felt like I had crossed some invisible threshold, like I had left behind the world I knew. The station itself was small, an old wooden building nestled between towering pines. It looked like it had been standing there for decades, untouched by modern hands. My new supervisor, Ranger Dalton, was waiting for me outside. Dalton was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't waste time with small talk. A firm handshake, a gruff nod, and he led me inside. The first part of our meeting was exactly what I expected. Rules about campers, wildlife safety, emergency protocols. I listened, nodded, and took notes. Then, just as I thought we were done, he pulled out a single folded piece of paper and slid it across the desk. "These are the park's special rules," he said, his voice low. I hesitated before unfolding it. The paper felt worn, creased from being handled too many times. The list inside wasn't long, but every rule sent a chill down my spine. Do not enter the forest between 2:13 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. If you are inside during this time, leave immediately. If you see a woman in white standing at the tree line, do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you blink. Ignore any voices calling your name from the trees. No one should be out there after dark. If you hear whistling between midnight and dawn, go inside. Lock the doors. Wait until it starts. If a man in a park ranger uniform asks you for help past sunset, do not follow him. He is not one of us. Do not look directly at the fire watchtower after midnight. If you see lights on, close your eyes and count to 10 before looking away. If you find a deer standing completely still staring at you, do not break eye contact. Back away slowly. Do not turn your back on it. Their reach ends with the sunrise. I looked up expecting a smirk, some indication that this was just an elaborate joke for the new guy. But Dalton's face was unreadable, his expression carved from stone. "This is some kind of initiation, right?" I asked, forcing a laugh, trying to scare the rookie. He didn't blink. "Follow them, or you won't last long here." Something in his tone, low, unwavering, dead serious, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I wanted to push back, to ask what he meant, but the weight of his gaze made me swallow my words. I told myself it was just a weird tradition, some local superstition meant to freak out newcomers. But still, I followed the rules, just in case. For the first few nights, nothing happened. The air was still, the forest eerily quiet, and I started to believe maybe it was all nonsense. Maybe Dalton and the others were just messing with me. Then, everything changed. It was my 5th night on the job. I was in the ranger station finishing up paperwork when I heard it. A whistle, low and slow, a tuneless melody, drifting through the open window. My entire body went rigid. My brain scrambled for an explanation, winged through the trees, maybe a bird. But deep down I knew, rule number 4, if you hear whistling between midnight and dawn, go inside. Lock the doors, wait until it stops. Heart pounding, I reached for the window and slammed it shut. My hands trembled as I locked the door and turned off the lights. The whistling didn't stop. It circled the station, moving closer, then farther away, weaving through the trees like something searching, like something calling. I held my breath. Seconds stretched into minutes. My ears strained in the darkness, every muscle in my body locked in place. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I didn't sleep after that, and I knew, without a doubt, that Black Hollow's rules weren't just superstition. They were warnings, and something out there was waiting for me to break them. 2 nights later, my shift was almost over when I found myself near the eastern tree line. The air was thick with silence, the kind that made every footstep sound too loud. Every breath felt like it disturbed something unseen. My flashlight cut through the dark, sweeping over the towering pines and the dense undergrowth. Then I saw it, something pale, barely visible between the trees. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the moon reflecting off a patch of fog or the smooth bark of a birch tree. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't a trick. A woman stood there. She wore a long white dress, the fabric draping loosely around her body, unmoving despite the faint breeze whispering through the branches. Her posture was unnaturally stiff, rigid, as if she had been standing there for hours, watching me. A slow, crawling dread slithered up my spine. I raised my flashlight, my fingers tightening around it. The beam cut through the dark and landed on her face. My stomach plummeted. She had no eyes, just 2 hollow sockets. dark, endless voids that swallowed the light, reflecting nothing back. Every instinct screamed at me to run. My legs locked in place, my breathing turned shallow. Then, through the rising panic, a thought clawed its way to the front of my mind. Rule number 2. If you see a woman in white, do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you blink. I forced myself to stay still, my vision blurred as my eyes burned, my lungs tightening with a desperate need to blink. It felt unnatural, unbearable, like my body was rebelling against me. Then she moved, her head tilted, slow and deliberate as if she was listening for something. A soft, almost curious motion. I felt like an animal caught in a predator's gaze. Then, just as silently, she stepped back. Another step. And then, as if the darkness itself swallowed her whole, she was gone. The second she disappeared, my body gave in. My eyes slammed shut, burning tears spilling down my face as I sucked in a shuddering breath. But I was still standing. I was alive. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands, pressing the button with more force than necessary. "Dalton," I rasped, my voice barely above a whisper. I saw her. A long pause. Then his voice crackled through. "You didn't blink, right?" His tone was sharp, urgent. "No, good. A breath. Go back inside." I didn't argue. I couldn't. A week passed, but the fear never left me. Every night, I patrolled with a careful, measured silence, my mind constantly circling back to her, to those empty sockets, to the way she moved, like something that wasn't supposed to exist in this world. I followed the rules religiously, every single one, but that didn't mean I felt safe. It was close to midnight when I finished my last patrol of the evening. The path leading back to the ranger station was empty, the trees looming on either side, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The only sound was the crunch of my boots against the dirt trail. Suddenly, I saw a figure standing near the trailhead, dressed in the familiar olive-green uniform of a park ranger. He wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I slowed my steps. Something was off. Even in the dim light, I could tell I didn't recognize him. And I knew every ranger assigned to Back Hollow. He raised a hand and waved. "Hey, can you help me with something?" His voice was smooth, too smooth. I stopped in my tracks. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe a ranger from another district, maybe someone new. But then, deep in my gut, I felt it wrong. Something about his tone, his posture, the way he stood too still, sent every instinct screaming. Then the words surfaced in my mind. Rule No. 5. If a man in a park ranger uniform asks for help past sunset, do not follow him. My mouth went dry. My pulse pounded in my ears. "What do you need?" I asked carefully, my voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It stretched across his face in a way that didn't seem natural, the skin pulling too tightly over his cheekbones. His lips curled upward, but his eyes, empty and unblinking, held nothing behind them. "Just come with me," he said, his voice too calm, too empty. I stepped back. He stepped forward. Then, his face shifted, not like an expression changing. No, his skin moved like something underneath was trying to adjust, trying to fit itself into human form. My stomach twisted. I turned and ran. The station was less than 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. My boots pounded against the dirt, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't dare look back. I reached the door and practically threw myself inside, slamming it shut, twisting the lock with trembling fingers. My body was shaking so violently I could barely breathe. Then, my radio crackled. Dalton's voice. "Did he talk to you?" I swallowed, forcing my breath to steady. "Yes," I whispered. A long pause. "Did you follow him?" "No." Silence. Then finally, Dalton spoke again. "Good." Another pause, longer this time. Then, quietly, he said, "Get some rest." But how could I? Because now I knew there was more than one thing in Black Hollow, and some of them wore our faces. By now I followed every rule like my life depended on it, because I was starting to believe it did. I had now memorized the paper that held the rules by heart, because breaking even one of them could cost me my life. One night, I was hiking a remote trail, far from the main paths, where the trees pressed in close and the only sound was my own footsteps crunching against fallen leaves. The air was cold, still, untouched by the usual sounds of the forest. No birds, no insects, just silence. Then, ahead of me on the trail, I saw a massive buck, its antlers stretched wide, jagged like twisted branches. Its body was eerily still, its legs locked in place as if it had been frozen mid-step. It didn't move, didn't flick its ears, didn't even breathe. It just stared. A deep, unsettling feeling crawled over my skin. Then, like a reflex, my mind pulled up another rule. Rule Nov. If you find a deer standing completely still, staring at you, do not break eye contact. Back away slowly. Do not turn your back. A pulse of fear shot through me. I forced my muscles to stay still, to resist the instinct to run. Carefully, I took a slow step backward. The deer's mouth opened. A sound came out. Not a grunt. Not the sharp, startled cry deer sometimes make. A voice. A garbled, broken whisper. You shouldn't be here. My body seized with terror. The words were wrong. Warped. Stretched. Almost human, but not quite. The sound slithered into my ears like something that didn't belong in this world. I couldn't help it. I turned and ran. Footsteps. No, hooves pounded against the dirt behind me. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I didn't stop until I saw the ranger station in the distance. Only then did I allow myself to glance over my shoulder. The trail was empty. The sun was up. But the silence still clung to the air, suffocating and heavy. I never used that trail again. 3 months later, I quit. I didn't need any more signs. I didn't need to understand. I just knew I had to leave. Dalton didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. Not everyone can handle it. As I packed up my things, a question gnawed at me, something I had avoided asking since the first night. But now, on the verge of leaving, I couldn't hold it in. The rules, I hesitated, gripping the strap of my backpack. They're not to protect us from the park, are they? Dalton let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. No, he said finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. They're to protect the park from us. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I just got in my car, drove out of Black Hollow, and never looked back. And no matter where I go, no matter how much time has passed, I never ever break a rule again. I was a park ranger at a national park. I will never forget this horrific night. It all started a few years ago. It was your run-of-the-mill boring shift at the office. I worked the night shifts, and our staff was pretty small, so there was usually only 1 or 2 other rangers working with me. But on this specific night I was alone. I yawned and looked at the clock. It read, only a few hours to go. Suddenly, I heard a branch crack outside. Like the paranoid person I was, I instantly tensed up and began to slightly panic. You're being crazy. It's just an animal or something. My paranoia returned twofold. Once I heard another branch breaking. I knew it was most likely nothing, but I got up and made sure the door was locked. And then I looked out the window, scanning the area for anything suspicious. I took a deep sigh of relief when the answer was affirmative. Upon sitting down, I swore I could hear the faintest footsteps coming from outside the office. So faint that they could have been in the back of my mind. But then they grew louder, and there was no doubt that they were real. The footsteps seemed to be getting louder and closer by the second, and they sounded like no normal animals or humans. I tried to distract myself by playing some games on my computer, but the paranoia was becoming too much to ignore. I jumped when I heard the horrific sound of screeching nails on one of the back office windows. I got up and quickly made my way to the window, only to find a long red scratch mark. My stomach threatened to empty itself at the sight. Usually I like being alone at the night shift, but at this moment I wished I had another co-coker with me. I heard another scratching noise, this time coming from the window closest to my desk. I ran out of the room and watched as 5 terrifying nails slowly scratched their way down the window, leaving the same red mark. I spent the next half hour sitting in my chair, shaking and teeming with intense anxiety, hearing the scratching sound every so often. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and looked at the first window. It was totally and utterly covered with red scratch marks. There was absolutely no seeing out of that window. I checked every other window, and it was the same for all of them. I sat back down and looked at the clock. It was now 4:00 AM. meaning there was only around an hour until dawn. If I can just wait for the morning shift to arrive, I should be okay. I knew I needed to make myself as comfortable as possible in such a situation. I went to each window and closed the curtains. I then settled down in my chair and tried to distract myself with some random news articles. Really the only entertainment I could access on the work computers. I shot up in my seat when I heard a horrific scream coming not too far from the office. I got out of my seat and made sure I had my firearm handy. I walked over to the front and tried to look out the window. Examining the surrounding areas, the scream had sounded like someone was in trouble or deeply fearful. I opened the door and embraced the chilly air before venturing into the outside world. I locked the door behind me and clicked on my flashlight and slowly scanned the surrounding area, finding nothing. "Is anyone out here?" I called out. I was met with the same horrific scream as my response, this time sounding much closer. The scream caused me to jump, and my nerves were filled with paranoia. "A-okay," I called out shakily. "Help." I heard an uncanny voice shriek, sending me into a panic daze. I continued to scan the area with my flashlight, desperately hoping to see what was making these terrifying screams. The hairs on my neck stood up when I felt the gut-wrenching sensation of being breathed upon. I turned around and aimed my flashlight directly behind me, illuminating the cruel imitation of a woman staring right at me. After the initial shock subsided, I booked it back to the ranger's office. I pulled out my set of keys and tried to find the one that would unlock the door, but it wasn't there. I turned around and was met with the scene of the skinwalker taunting me, dangling the key I needed in front of me. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I ran to the side of the office and began to relentlessly pound on the glass window, but it just wouldn't break. I looked behind me once more and saw the skinwalker was now a dozen paces closer. I involuntarily screamed from pure fear and booked it into the forest, not caring where I was going, only caring about putting as much distance between me and this horrific creature as possible. While running, I pulled out my cell phone and crashed when I saw it had no service. I then pulled out my radio and tried to call for backup, but my only response was static. After running for a while, my body gave out from exhaustion. As I lay on the forest ground, pushing as many deep lungfuls of oxygen I could into my lungs, I scanned the area, looking for any sign of the skinwalker. Once I locked eyes with the two eyes staring at me from behind a tree, adrenaline took over, and I was suddenly able to run again. I knew just how long the forest stretched. It would take me a long time to reach the end, and even when I did, it wasn't like anyone would be there waiting to help me. "Please help me," the creature shrieked. Something about its voice was incredibly distressing and inhuman. I picked up my pace twofold, not caring about how scratched up I would be from all the branches and whatnot I was running into at full speed. I tripped over a branch and screamed in pain as my face impacted the ground. I scurried onto my feet and noticed my flashlight was no longer on. I couldn't see anything. I could only hear the sound of the footsteps getting closer and closer. I felt the flashlight and realized that one of the batteries had fallen out during my fall. I bent down and panically felt the ground near me, desperately hoping to come across the battery I needed for my most important sense sight. I decided to cut my losses and leave the flashlight when the footsteps had become too close to ignore. I was now briskly walking through the forest instead of running, my arms out in front of me to feel what was ahead of me. After a long time of venturing in the forest, I had finally made it out. I looked at the dimly moonlit river beneath me, feeling the tiniest bit safer. The tiny sense of safety I felt was ripped away from me once I heard the footsteps. I climbed down and began to run on the river's beach. My body kept threatening to collapse from exhaustion, but I wouldn't let it. I looked behind me while I ran and could now see the skinwalker in greater detail. It had morphed from the uncanny woman into a four-legged beast, charging at me on all fours. I searched through my mind, trying to gather up all of the information I knew about skinwalkers. I had heard of the legends of a skinwalker roaming this park, but I always thought it was just a nonsense fairy tale. I remembered that a way to kill a skinwalker was to state its true identity to it. I now had an idea, but it fell very short. I had no clue what this creature's true identity was, and it was pretty clear I had no way of finding it in the near future. I looked up and felt a small glimpse of hope when I saw the light of the sun slowly creeping up above the mountains. I looked behind me and suddenly noticed that I couldn't see the creature following me anymore. I took a sigh of relief and slowed down my pace slightly, but I didn't dare stop running. I knew that the closest ranger's office was only an hour's walk away. I ran for a while longer, and then slowed to a brisk walk due to the exhaustion I had put my body through. After a long and treacherous walk, I could see the other ranger's office in my sight. The sun had now fully risen. I made it to the ranger's office and attempted to catch my breath while banging on the door. I heard footsteps shuffle and come my way, and then the door opened, revealing another park ranger looking concerned. "Geez, are you all right?" he asked. "There is something in the woods," I said between ragged breaths. "I know." The ranger calmly responded. "Tell you what?" I asked shakily. I said. The ranger started. I watched in complete horror as the ranger slowly morphed into the creature I was familiar with. Before he fully morphed, I took one last look at his badge. His name read Apache Sioux. "I know." The creature finished, its voice now heavily distorted. I instantly bolted to the river behind me, and the creature followed. I didn't know if I could run much longer without passing out. Suddenly, I realized that the name on his badge would be a good guess to his true identity. I decided to take the risk. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. "Apache Sioux." The creature suddenly seemed startled, and it began to retreat. "Apache Sioux." I screamed even louder, causing the creature to run away. I began to roar out in maniacal laughter. I had won, or so I thought. Out of nowhere, I heard the deafening sound of what sounded like dozens of thousands of gut-wrenching screams at once. I felt my ears as they throbbed in pain. I heard the sound of trees rustling, and I turned to see the most panic-inducing scene of hundreds of skinwalkers and wendigos running out of all directions of the forest, charging at me. I screamed and ran into the ranger's office, closing and locking the door behind me. I sat down in the chair and began to hyperventilate when the creatures started relentlessly banging on all sides of the office. It seemed like no end was near except the end of my life. "Shit, shit, shit," I screamed in a frustrated and fearful tone. The skinwalkers and wendigos began to tear down pieces of the building one by one, causing me to slowly retreat into the center of the room until the building was almost entirely destroyed. The next few minutes were a horror-filled daze. The creatures were slowly removing the last pieces of building, as if to taunt me. I swear I even heard a few of them snicker. I didn't know much about these legendary creatures, so I figured it would be a good idea to commit the most destructive act I could think of, a fire. As a park ranger, I had some decent experience of knowing how to make a fire with nothing except a rock and steel. I began to search through what was left of the office, and a pocket knife, oh so tantalizing, caught my eye. I ran for the pocket knife, but the creatures must have known what I was attempting, so they jumped off and attacked me. It was pure agony, and I literally felt like I had been transported to hell. Each of the creatures mercilessly tortured me, but my brain blocked out the pain the best it could and focused on the one thing that mattered in that moment: creating a fire. I grabbed the pocket knife, flipped it open, and rubbed a rock against it. I saw sparks forming, and my eyes widened with hope. I tried and tried again, until eventually one of the sparks caught the wood and fire began to slowly but surely envelope the building. The creatures all shrieked and slowly retreated from the growing flame, and so did I. Some of the creatures had already been caught in the fire and were too far gone already. Only a handful survived, and they all decided to run into the forest. I pressed my radio and explained that a fire had erupted and that it was spreading fast. I ran down to the river, thinking it would give me the best chance of protection from this fire. I jumped into the river and struggled immensely as the current tried to pull me into its wrath, but I swam and swam until I was on the other side. I collapsed on the ground and took in deep lungfuls of oxygen, feeling victorious but also defeated at the same time. I looked back and saw that my radio was floating down the heavy current. I cursed at myself and got up. I decided to cut my losses and move on. I needed to find the nearest ranger office to alert them of the fire before it got too bad. I walked into the forest and was instantly enveloped with paranoia. I felt like I was being watched with a million taunting eyes, waiting for me with pure rage after what I had just done. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, examining every single piece of every tree, trying to ease my paranoia. Just as I was about to let my guard down, I saw two unblinking and menacing eyes staring directly at me from behind a tree. At first, I froze in complete fear and shock, but just as soon after I was running for my life once again, giving me a strong sense of unpleasant déjà vu. I didn't know much about this part of the park, but I assumed this forest didn't go on for that long. After hours of walking, I had proven my assumption incorrect. This forest seemed to be going on forever, and I could smell the nasty smell of smoke growing more pungent. Finally, I noticed the trees becoming less close to each other, and before I knew it, I was out of the forest. I made it to the office and explained the fire situation to the officers there, but not bothering to explain the skinwalker situation to them. I knew they would just think it was insane nonsense. Anyways, I eventually made it home safely, but I quit my job very shortly after that, and I still have nightmares about those creatures to this day. A window in the park. Jason was on a run. His parents were out for their weekly date night, and his little brother had some girl over. Jason figured he'd give them a little space. There was a cool breeze. It felt good on Jason's legs as his footsteps echoed off the houses in his neighborhood. His mind wandered as he ran. He thought of his college essay. It was due soon. He should probably get working on that. Jason thought about Chelsea. He'd had a crush on her since last year, when they had physics together. He had been considering asking her out, but Jason knew what his friends would say. They'd try to give him all their knowledge about the opposite sex, and Jason would probably end up listening and ruin it within the first week. He didn't want to risk it. Jason tripped on a small lip in the sidewalk, tearing him away from his thoughts. They should probably get that fixed, Jason said to himself. He jogged to a street lamp nearby to rest. The yellow light cast a dim glow over the grass behind him. Jason was at the park. He'd run almost 3 miles without realizing it. The park was tucked away towards the back of the neighborhood and was surrounded by trees besides the opening toward the road. The park was mostly just a large field with a swings near the road. It was eerily dark. The only light came from the street lamp he was under, and the one on the other side. Jason didn't remember them putting in another light. It was far away, but it cast the same lazy yellow glow as all the other street lamps in the neighborhood. Jason's phone lit up. A text from his brother. "You coming back soon?" Jason responded with a thumbs up emoji. He looked up to see the light from the new lamp had gotten brighter. As Jason studied the hazy glow, a chill began to take hold. The light had moved closer. He had to check this out. Just a quick look, then he could make his way home. Jason was about 30 feet out when he noticed something. The light was a lot lower than it should have been, just above eye level. He kept walking toward it. The wind picked up, and Jason started to shiver. He was getting really close now. It was a window, a small rectangular window with light pouring out onto the grass before it. Jason wanted to scratch his head, but his hands were stuffed as far into his pockets as they could manage. Searching for any form of warmth, Jason took a lap around this floating window. Light was only coming from one side. The other side was a black rectangle, blocking the view of the stars. What the hell? Jason thought. He walked back toward the light. It was only half a foot above his head. From his angle, he could see inside it. It was just a ceiling, nothing exciting. Jason decided he could at least take a quick look inside. After a quick round of stretching, Jason readied himself to jump. A short hop would be plenty. Jason hopped up, but not high enough. He saw what looked like a kitchen, a white fridge, some cabinets, and a sink. Jason jumped again. This time, his chin cleared the bottom of the window. It was just a kitchen. There was a living room just past it, or maybe a dining room. The room had been dark. The sink was full of dishes, and the fridge had some letter magnets, the same ones that Jason had played with until he was old enough to spell words his parents deemed inappropriate, especially with his little brother around. Jason was laughing at the memory as he landed. He froze when he heard a laugh coming from inside the window. Jason had to see whose window was out in the middle of a field. This was becoming one hell of a run. Jason moved a few steps to the right, hoping he could see whoever was inside this mystery window. He jumped. It was a dinner table. There were a few plates set with food steaming, and people sitting to eat it. Jason could hear a conversation, but couldn't make out any of the words. He couldn't see their faces either, just their backs. It was a normal-looking house, with a normal-looking family having dinner inside. A small part of Jason felt weird about spying on them, but his curiosity was getting the better of him. Jason jumped from the same spot to no avail. Still just backs turned to him enjoying their meal and conversation. But Jason came down on a particularly dewy spot of grass, slipping and falling hard. "Damn it," Jason said, rubbing his newly bruised elbow. He brushed it off and got to his feet to jump again. As his face cleared the windowsill, Jason realized the conversation had stopped. They had heard him. Their faces were turned to him. Jason's eyes widened as the small part of him began taking over. He was intruding on their family time. He was a creep now. Jason's heart was racing. but he had seen their faces. Something was off about them. Jason couldn't remember exactly what. His conscience was torn, but his curiosity was winning the battle in his mind. Something was not right with whoever was in that window, or maybe he was just freaking himself out. For all he knew, this could be a hallucination or something. Jason decided to jump again. His hands were shaking now. His forehead was beaded with sweat. As he got into position, he could hear a voice. It was closer now, no longer seated at the dinner table. As risky as it was to jump, Jason reasoned that this would be the last time. He needed to get home. His chin cleared the window, and someone was staring right back at him. The face was large and round. The skin was a chalky gray and hairless, with 2 large slits running from the forehead to the mouth. The thing's skin covered where Jason figured eyes usually go. The mouth was small, with large square teeth lining the jaw. The lips were pulled away from the teeth, as if it was smiling. It was wearing a brown wool sweater. A shark tooth necklace hung around its neck. Jason landed on his back, and voices could be heard clearly from the window. "Close that damn window," a deep voice shouted. "You're letting all the hot air out." "But Dad," a higher voice responded. It was the thing at the window. "I don't want to hear it," the deeper voice shouted back. "Close it." The thing in the window grumbled to himself, displeased with its orders. It stuck its head out of the window to get another look at Jason. "Now," the voice from inside barked. Okay. The thing whined. Its head turned behind him. It tossed something to Jason and closed the window. The light was gone. Jason scrambled to his feet and ran home without looking back. He made it there in record time. A week or so later, Jason's little brother was playing soccer at the field. During a particularly slow moment in the game, he noticed something in the grass. It was a shark tooth necklace. He picked it up, pumped his fist, and stuffed it in his pocket. When he showed Jason later that day, Jason's eyes got wide. "Where did you get that?" Jason asked. "I just found it at the park." "Why?" "Just try not to lose it," Jason grinned. "It's probably the coolest thing you'll ever own." Please don't leave your kids alone at the hotel pool. We arrived at the Yosemite Inn and Suites on July 1 at 4:00 p.m. and I was exhausted from driving 300 miles from the Mojave Desert. My 11 and 12-year-old daughters wanted nothing more than to jump in the pool, where my wife and I wanted to just lay down in the room. In the past, as long as the neighborhood seemed okay, and there were no seedy characters in the pool, then we would just let the girls go alone in the pool. So my wife Gina and my daughters Grace and Samantha and I went to the pool that appeared to no one that would cause the girls any harm. There was just a couple that looked to be in their early 70s. The older guy didn't even look at the girls when we walked into the pool area or even when the girls stepped into the pool, so I felt pretty safe that he wasn't a creep. We exchanged a few niceties with the couple, where they told us they were from Boston, and we both commented about the dry heat that was in the hundreds that didn't seem that bad without any humidity. I told the girls we were in rooms 105 and the older couple said they were in room 205, which had a nicer view of the wilderness, which I agreed since our room overlooked a parking lot. Gina and I went to the hotel room, and about a half hour later the girls came to the room. Hopefully they put enough sunscreen on because I didn't want to hear them complaining about a sunburn tomorrow. Fortunately there were no sunburns, and in the morning we had our free continental breakfast. The hotel staff were courteous and gave us a few tips about Yosemite Park. We drove an hour to Yosemite, and the hike to see the Yosemite Falls was breathtaking. After Yosemite, we drove to San Francisco, where we were all too tired from the hike, so we went to the hotel and got takeout dinner and went to bed. We stayed in San Francisco for a few days, where we went to Alcatraz and a few other popular sites. A few days later we headed to the airport and got to Philadelphia 6 hours later. We were all too happy to be home, and Gina posted her photos of the trip on Facebook. Life back at our Philadelphia suburb went back to normal, where the girls had to stay home for a week until day camp started, while Gina and I worked. The first day back we didn't want to cook, so we got takeout, and the next day we were happy to have our own cooked pasta after eating out for so long. "Ted, where's the big cooking pot?" Gina asked me. "It must be in the bottom cupboard with the rest of the pots and pans." "No," I looked and it's not there. I remember we used that big pot before we left for our trip, where I hand washed it and put it back, so it would be impossible if it wasn't there. "Well, it's not. Look." After moving around the various pots and pans, I say, "That's really odd. We had that pot for the past 15 years, ever since we got married. My parents got it for us as a wedding gift. What do you think happened to it? I don't know, but let me go ask the girls if they know anything. They're both in the living room watching TV, I said. Girls, have you seen that big pot that we cook with sometimes? No, I haven't, Samantha said. No, sorry Dad, I haven't seen it either, Grace said. I walked back into the kitchen and I told Gina, where we both scratched our heads in confusion. Do you think we should call the police? Gina asked. I don't know, they'll probably laugh at us for calling them for something that has about a 50-cent depreciated value. It's not the cost of the pot that I care about. It's the fact that someone must have come into our house and took it. When? When we were in the West Coast. Is there anything else missing? I asked. Nothing obvious. All the TVs are still here, and obviously the furniture. Though I clearly remember returning the pot to the cupboard after washing and drying it. You never know, maybe I inadvertently did something with it. Like what? I don't know. Threw it away in the garbage or something else. Well, don't you remember when we came through the door when we got home from the airport and I said that we should have taken the small amount of garbage out because the house smelled? Yeah, I know it would be in the garbage can in the kitchen if I had thrown it out. I'm just giving suggestion. Gina looks like she is at her wit's end where she is either about to cry or start to yell. Let's just forget about it and use the 2 smaller pots, I suggest. So that's what we did, and we cooked and ate the pasta. Gina and I did the dishes and we retired for the night. The girls played on their phones for a little bit and we all went to bed. Where's the remote? I asked Gina. Did you look under your pillows? Yes, I searched the whole bed. Well, it's not on the dresser or on our nightstands. What about under the bed? Okay, let me look. After looking around under the bed, I didn't see the remote. No, I don't see it. Ted, I'm calling the police. Because we're missing a remote. Yes, they'll either laugh at us or arrest us. Ted, the pot is missing, and now the remote. I know, but that's not something that someone would steal. Somebody was in our house, that's why I'm calling the police. Based on, pot's missing, and now the remote. Gina, people have been joking about missing remotes ever since the remotes were invented. Yes, the missing pot is strange, but the remote will reappear eventually. Ted, the remote isn't in this room. Look around. There's no place for it to hide. Well, maybe one of the kids took it, and they're sleeping now, so I don't want to ask them. Ted, their TV is different than ours. Our remote won't work on their TV, and they know that. I know Gina, but maybe they took it anyways, thinking that it would work. Okay, whatever. Then let's just go to sleep. We went to sleep and Gina and I went to work as normal. The kids aren't going to camp this week and are staying home, so we gave them a list of chores to do that maybe they'll do, but maybe not. When we got home from work, both Gina and I were surprised that the girls did the laundry. However, we were a little disappointed that they didn't fold the clothes. We didn't say anything to them, for we didn't think it was such a big deal. Grace, our oldest daughter, asked me to enter the password on her phone because of the parental controls on her iPhone, so she could download an app to play a game. I agreed for her to download the app, so I took her phone and I inadvertently hit the phone icon on her cell phone. I noticed that Grace had a phone call from Delaware, where the phone call lasted 63 minutes at 11 a.m. Hey Grace, who are you talking to from Delaware? Oh, that was just your friend Diane. I don't have a friend named Diane. Don't you remember Diane, your friend that you ran into at the pool at that Yosemite hotel? No, I don't. The older man Jack and his wife Diane, who you were talking with before you and Mom went back to the room. You mean that old couple that I briefly spoke with that said they were from Boston? Yeah. Aren't you friends with them? No, I never seen them before in my life. Well, Diane said she stayed in our house for a few days. What? Yeah, she said that you made arrangements with them so they could stay here while we were in California. No, I said no such thing. I have no idea who those people are. Well, they stopped by while you were at work to get some of their remaining things. What the hell is going on? You let them in this house. Why would you do that, and why wouldn't you tell us? Dad, they were talking to me and Samantha like you were old friends, and they told us at the pool that they would probably see us when we got back home. Oh my God. This is horrifying. Did you give them our phone number and address at Yosemite? How did they get your cell phone number? No, me and Samantha didn't tell them anything. We would have told you if they were asking for our address or our phone number. Well, how did they find out where we live, and how did they get your phone number? Well, Diane called our home phone and the reception was bad, so I gave her my cell phone number. Gina, come here. What? in just finding out that the old couple who I barely said more than Hito at the pool when we were at that Yosemite hotel were actually in our house with the girls earlier today and probably stayed here while we were in California. What? I know it sounds crazy, but somehow they got our address and possibly our phone number. But they may have gotten our phone number once they were in the house. I said to Gina, "This is a joke, right?" "No." I know this is the craziest thing I ever heard. I wonder why they stayed here and what, if anything, they took from us. "I am calling the police." I called the police and they were reluctant to come over at first, but once I said those strangers were in our house when we weren't home, then they agreed that what they did was considered breaking and entering and sent a Detective Murphy to our house to get our information. Before the detective came to our house, I called the Yosemite Inn and Suites to try to get more information. "Hello, Yosemite Inn and Suites." "Yes, I stayed there on July 1st at your hotel, and something really strange happened, where I briefly met an older couple in your pool area, and they somehow stayed at our house uninvited while we were still in California." "Whoa, sir, that does sound really strange. How do you know that it was them who stayed at your house?" "They actually came over when our daughters were home alone. I remember that they said they were staying in room 205, which was easy to remember because we stayed in room 105. Well, I can tell you that we don't have a room Seriously? Well, how did they get into the pool area? Sir, sometimes the door to the pool doesn't close all the way, or sometimes people inadvertently let non-guests into the pool area. Okay, whatever. Well, how did they get our address? I have no idea, sir. Did you tell them your room number? I told my daughters and maybe they overheard our room number. Did one of your daughters tell them your last name? I didn't ask them that. Why would that have made a difference? I'm just guessing, but if your daughters didn't tell them your address, then perhaps that older couple came up to the lobby desk and pretended to be you and somehow got your address. Wouldn't they have to show proof of identification before the hotel clerk would give any information out? Well, sir, I would say yes, but perhaps the couple said the right thing to avoid showing identification. But I'll put an incident report in to try to get more information. Okay, do you think you'll be able to find out if an employee gave away our information? Probably not. Because even if an employee didn't follow the right protocol by not asking for identification, that same employee probably won't admit that they did that. Do you have security cameras in the lobby? We do, but we only keep the recordings for 3 days. Okay, great. Thank you. I hung up the phone, frustrated. Then Detective Murphy came over and I told him everything that I knew. Besides the pot and remote missing, Gina also noted a few of our personal photographs missing, which we were equally as dumbstruck by as our remote and pot missing. I followed the detective's advice and cancelled all of our credit cards, and I monitored my retirement and other investment accounts to make sure no unauthorized transfers would occur. The girls could only give a vague description of what they looked like for the police sketch artist, so Diane and Jack looked like every other gray-haired couple. Detective Murphy said he would contact us if he heard anything additional. Diana's call from New Jersey came from a burner phone, which wasn't any help to the detective. The detective isn't sure how they got into our house, but I may have left the basement door unlocked. We heard nothing new after a couple of weeks, but I noticed something really disturbing while we were eating dinner tonight. As I looked up into the chandelier above the dining room table, I saw a small hidden camera. Something in the parking lot is hunting me. This is part 1 of my first horror story. I plan on narrating it and uploading to YouTube. Hope you enjoy, and please feel free to leave feedback. I can feel the concrete, refreshing and damp on my fingertips. Its cool weight is pressing against my chest with every labored breath. I can open my eyes, but it's so bright, and the buzzing it's so loud, drowning out my thoughts. My mind is muddled. Thinking feels like swimming through jelly. I can barely remember where I am or what I was doing. How did I get here? I force another breath. The memory of a blank text message flashes through my mind. I manage to crack my eyes open again. My eyelids scream in protest, but I hold them. My body is trembling involuntarily. Oh God, my legs are starting to go numb. It's so cold. God, I don't want to die. Air hisses through my teeth as I take another breath. Another memory, running through the darkness, running from something. I don't have much time left. The deafening buzz assaults my eardrums. The blinding light sears my eyes. I try to take another breath, but I can't push against the concrete anymore. I feel the backs of my eyelids grinding like sandpaper against my eyes. Shutting. It's dark. As the final specks of yellow light fade, memories crisp and sharp like ice water fill my mind. I can't help but begin to remember. Today was so normal, so why is the night so bright, and why can't I move? That's right, my name. My name is Tim. An unimportant name for an unimportant person, I guess. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't say that because I have low self-esteem or anything. It's just a painfully true matter of fact. You see, I'm a secretary for a mid-sized warehouse. We mostly ship farm equipment to local hardware stores. I'm sure it sounds fine on paper, but honestly, this job's been eating away at me for years. The pay's nothing special. The office politics are draining, and my life is an endless cycle of paperwork, emails, and meetings. Some days I can think of anything worse than sending out the same set of auto-filled memos and canned phone calls over and over again to the same people on repeat. Every day is a reset. The same tasks, the same questions. Nothing I do makes a permanent impact. It's like a bad version of Groundhog Day without Bill Murray's comic relief. The only inconsistent thing here is what time I clock out. On good days, I finish my to-do list by 3 p.m. and go straight home. On bad days, the list still gets done by 3 p.m., but my boss decides to keep everyone around until 5 p.m. anyway. I'm not sure if he does this because some of my lazier coworkers complain when others go home early, or if he's just trying to kiss corporate ass by pretending to be productive. But it's demoralizing either way. Anyway, today was one of the bad days. I was sitting at my desk, an old Excel sheet open next to my email so I would look busy. Whoa, excited to go home, Tim. Pat's hand dug into my shoulder. I tried not to recoil. Of course not, Pat. Just living the dream, you know, I said through clenched teeth. I craned my neck around, making eye contact with my boss. He grinned. The wrinkles above that disgustingly fake smile didn't reach his eyes. Right. Well, feel free to head home after you lock up. And remember, only one day until the weekend, he said, his hand lifted, followed by jingling as a lanyard full of keys landed on my desk in a clatter. I wanted to object, but he was already gone. Of course, I would have to lock up. By the time I checked the last door, it was well after 5 p.m. The sun was well low the horizon, and my eyes were burning with exhaustion. I turned the lock in the final glass door with a click, pocketed the keys, nodded to my reflection, and turned around. Cold pinpricks danced up my spine as I looked out over the dark parking lot. Maybe it was the exhaustion, but the parking lot felt off tonight. Too empty, too still. Even the air seemed heavier, like the world was waiting for something to happen. The silhouette of my car waited menacingly at the end of the lot, like a beast crouching in the shadows. A lone pole light cast a flickering cone from the center of the lot. I took a breath and walked quickly toward my car. As I entered the cone of light halfway across, I froze. Another jolting tingle more intense than the last, freezing my body in place. The moment I stepped into the light, it had stopped flickering, as though in reaction to my presence. I craned my neck upwards, searching for an explanation in the light bulb fixture, but finding none, except was the light getting brighter. And now that I looked closer, the light seemed to oscillate, shifting between a sickly yellow and pale green. The shifting hues were captivating, but felt somehow more threatening than relaxing, like the rasping rhythmic breaths of a wolf standing over its prey just before it lunges for the kill. My phone buzzed. I jumped, letting out a startled yelp. It must be Pat texting me again. I sighed. He could never just trust someone to finish a job on their own, could he? Ever the micromanager, chastising myself for being so anxious. I unlocked my phone, opening my texts to find nothing. No notification, no overbearing message, no missed call, just nothing. My breath caught as my gaze drifted past my phone to the ground at my feet. A dusting of moth corpses bathed in the yellow light, blending in with the pavement. Not a single wing so much as twitched amidst the congregation of lifeless husks. The air felt thick. I held my breath, the potential act of moving feeling like the trigger to spring a trap. This was silly. Was someone messing with me? This would be psychotic even for Pat.
After what felt like minutes, I dared to breathe again, the tension in my body making the inhalation rigid and uneven. I hadn't heard anyone nearby. The night was as silent as it was still. There wasn't even a breeze to rustle the leaves. This had to be a coincidence, a random messed up occurrence of nature. I strode to my car, speeding up as the corpses protested with a cacophony of deafening crunches and thunderous pops beneath my feet. I pushed down a sense of nausea and strode on.
At this point, I just wanted to get out of here as quickly as I could. I entered my car, locked the door behind me with a clunk, and floored it out of the parking lot and onto the wooded lane which led to the main road. I rubbed my temples and turned on the radio, trying to push the memory of the moths from my frazzled mind. Just a dying light bulb and a few dead moths. That's all it was. As I stopped to turn onto the main road, I took a final glance in my rearview mirror. I could almost swear I saw the light in that damn parking lot start to flicker again in the distance, the cone narrowing into a slit like the eye of a predatory beast. Not that it's good enough to warrant usage, but if you want to use this story for narration, please ask me. Thanks. Never go into Black Forest. My ex and I got sober this year, against our sponsor's warnings, and completely abandoning all reason and self-preservation. Us two very deadly peas in a pod jested that our mutual toxicity was non-existent. I had 8 months sober, and she had 10. I was doing well working construction for an independent contractor, and she as a medical assistant, though I can't say knowing she was working around narcotics on a daily basis wasn't worrisome. But I know high when I see it, and she was staying straight. Nevertheless, it was I who broke. I'd kept my contempt for sobriety hidden, but not any longer. We should get out of here. I'm craving. Andy is 10 minutes away. If I stay around here, we're fucked. She agreed. We both were neck deep in acute withdrawal, the stage of recovery where an addict is most likely to relapse, whether it be due to insomnia, adversity, or simply boredom with cleanliness. We recognized that leaving our connections and access to dope for a while was best, so we came up with something radical: travel to Europe and look for vampires, ghosts, or otherwise. Lee and I are inextricably drawn to one another because our personalities are nearly identical. We're both extremists. Better to burn out than fade away kind of thing. When we used, we really used. When we fought, we really fought. An indestructible bond of codependency, which brings most adept couples back into the deadly fray with exponential fervor from before. Both highly interested in the paranormal, we decided to go to Germany, a country with a civilization's worth of folklore and supernatural mystery. And of all haunted places in Germany, none are more cursed than Black Forest. 5 degrees of separation later, we'd gone from the hotel clerk to rogue nature enthusiast, a graying, lean countryman named Noah, whose aching, tough as leather soles had traversed more miles of forgotten wilderness than the lifespan of 10 suburbanites. This guy ran a little hot, $1,000 USD for 2 days. But 1,000 for seeing the world was less destructive than 1,000 collapsing your veins, commencing in a lifetime of memories rather than desperate spiritual rubble. He would lead us to a mesmerizing waterfall and natural hot spring, and show us things along the way. The forest began somewhere around Heidelberg, and very quickly we understood we were in a primitive wilderness. Firs and pines so tall that merely tilting your head up wouldn't be enough before falling backwards, all packed together so tightly that the sun couldn't even pierce through the narrow cracks, looking into the prism of a million mirrors, all reflecting and refracting the same deep emerald images over and over again until the end of time. Eventually you travel so deeply into the dark abyss that front, back, and all sides looked exactly the same, and it was utterly unnerving. It was noon and dusk simultaneously. I continued to check the compass. Southeast, bordering France on one side, and the majestic, castle-lined Rhine River on the other, deep in between. Noah spoke virtually the entire time, about this and about that. His lineage reached back ages to royalty. Rudolph I of the 13th century, and his grandson was merely a tour guide. How the mighty have fallen. The fragility and dubiousness of empires suddenly came into focus. So tell us about the haunted history. You know of Nosferatu, the old silent movie about Dracula. Yes, back in the 20s, the actor who played Dracula was a recluse. He lived in these woods close to Offenburg, about 100 miles from here, and was seen many times walking the woods at night all alone. Being dead 80 years now, and yet the last reported sighting of Max was this past January. So, mistaken identity, I'd suppose, but he was spotted right here, right where our feet tread now, about 20 meters down that way. Just beyond that one slightly crooked tree. Nobody walks this deeply without a guide, and he was reportedly alone. Noah admitted it was only a rumor. The waterfall was still 11 miles away, and the trunks only grew tighter. so narrow that all trails had disappeared, and our compass was the only pathway back to civilization. At one point, Noah stopped us and said to stay put. I immediately saw the hesitation in Leah's eyes. "Stay here until I come back," he whispered. The silence and calmness as we waited was dreadful. A faint echoing chirp sounded from far away, while the trees creaked like rusty hinges on an old wooden door, echoing so abrasive that it sounded like we were trapped under a massive tin roof. "You think it's an animal?" "I don't know, but I'm not moving unless he says so." "You trust him?" "I'd bet her for $1,000. Clouds began to roll in, and the eerie, stilted shadows of the towering trees began to shift and seemingly curl inward toward us like a giant's fingers. Then the sound of leaves whooshing and branches snapping rang out before the old German reappeared. "Okay, he very anxiously began. You've come to see the macabre, right? Scary stuff? Why? Yeah?" Leah replied with trepidation. "Well, you're about to confront it. It's bad. So if you would like, we can take another path." "No, I want to see it." Leah speaking my words.
"It's this way."
Soon as we rounded the bend, which wasn't really much of a bend but a blind spot, Leah shrieked, and I felt my heart skip. He was just peacefully swaying in the breeze, ankles and hands bound by rope. I became immediately dizzy and puked for the first time in 10 years. A man hanging lifeless and blue by his neck, gently turning in concentric circles. Below him was a stone, carved statue, a 7-foot-tall bust of a genderless figure with enormous angel wings, and at its rectangular base, words inscribed in a language I've never seen. Leah immediately began to panic and shake uncontrollably. She wrapped her arms around me and buried her head in my chest. She likes being scared, but not traumatized, and I think this gave her a little of both. I began bubbling with fear and anger at Noah. "I thought you said we wouldn't see a person for 400 miles. What the fuck is this? This is literally fucked up." I raged at the poor old man, as is my nature. My personality dictates, and has always dictated, that I fly off the handle first and exercise reason later. Of course, he couldn't know that 10 miles in we'd come across a suicide victim. Once my rage simmered and I began to take it in calmly, I only had one question, posed after a hasty apology. How exactly could someone hang themselves when branches of these trees don't even start until 20 feet up off the ground? Noah assured us that this was a lark and huge coincidence, before going into further detail. "There is much folklore about this place," he began as we casually walked underneath the dangling corpse. Leah was clutching my arm tightly and quietly weeping. At one point I had to halt our progress and just hold her for a second. 2 years ago, her sister hanged herself in their parents' closet. Mom had been home and in the house 3 days, wondering where Alyssa ran off to. She was about to grab her coat to walk out the door for the store when she went into the closet and found her calmly turning in circles. She had been in the same house as her dead child all that time. Since then, Leah has become very sensitive about things. Seeing something so horrific, impositive, induced some kind of trauma on her. And so Noah continued. The inscription on the stone is Old Germanic reading, "Beware those who fly with no legs." My skin began to crawl. As the sound of crackling branches commenced above us, I felt something shifting from my peripherals up in the canopy, as dread began to consume me. He went on. "The further we go away from civilization, the more monuments we will come across." I asked him the meaning of those who fly with no legs, and as I did, I could sense the pulsating of my arteries as my blood pressure spiked. However, once he explained, I began to relax into a more sentient state. Germany was once called the Holy Roman Empire. In the Middle Ages, there were many battles fought here. In those days, an advancement in military warfare were catapults, or trebuchets. When religious missionaries, most of whom knew nothing about technological advancement, would go on a pilgrimage through the forest, the flaming artillery would suddenly crash down upon them, and from there they deemed them as fallen angels. It's just an old wives' tale. A pilgrimage? To where? I can only read the inscriptions as we come upon them. They're sparse, but in the scheme of this great chasm, abundant. For every 50 I've come across, there's probably 250 I haven't. Give us the gist of it. Leah finally spouted in an impatient tone. Most come from different places in time, but are all connected to one narrative, and that plot is the basis for the hauntings in this place. But from my perspective, they're simply perverted interpretations of the original meaning, which I just described. What are the perversions? My eyes were fixed just above center at whatever was making its way from tree to tree 100 feet above my head, but quietly paying attention to Lee's cross-examination. They say that the deeper we go, the air becomes poisoned, that the traveler then becomes disoriented, walking in spirals endlessly until they either starve or kill themselves. We halted when Lee stopped moving her feet. I want to go back. Thank you, Noah. This was unforgettable, but we need to go. I began to plead with her as Noah just stood dumbfounded, gazing upon the forest floor. We should leave now. What if we do get lost? Babe, just chill, okay? What do you mean chill? He just told us that this place fucking kills people right after walking under a dead guy. This place is cursed. I can feel it. Just like I could feel it the night Alyssa. God, just please listen to me. Noah, how far until the waterfall? Leah instantly shoved me with all her might. About 6 miles. You both go then to your precious waterfall. I'll just go back. Leah begrudgingly stomped back the way we came, before I physically stopped her. We sat in the dirt while Leah made up her mind. I suppose it was a bit callous of me to expect her to traipse on after what we had seen, but eventually she came around and we were back on our feet. The deal breaker was simply my phone having both a charge and a signal. We trekked on in silence for quite some time. Noah mentioned that there was a clearing up ahead, maybe a mile, and we could camp there for the night and finish the trek tomorrow. I intently listened and glanced above me in silent worry, only realizing that whatever animal was follow us had disappeared. 2.4 miles later, we never passed through this clearing Noah mentioned, as the repetitive green labyrinth we were seemingly becoming trapped in had further proven more of the folklore than it did purported reality. Even more nerve-wracking was the dying light of the sun. The forest had become a vast amalgam of itself, and that's when the most terrifying moment of my life had come to pass. All this time my compass had us heading due south, until Noah stopped us. I immediately saw the hesitation in Lys's eyes. "Stay here until I come back," he whispered. A faint chirping echoed from far away as the trees creaked like rusty hinges on an old wooden door. "So you think it could be an animal?" asked Lys inquisitively. And then, just for a moment, I became deliriously dizzy, as one thought permeated in my cerebral cortex. Didn't we have this conversation earlier? Suddenly, Leah seemed unbothered, and then another thought hit me. It formed in my mind without even a modicum of mental exertion, like the thought was placed there, unformed by free will in any capacity, echoing so abrasive that it sounded like we were under a massive tin roof. I tried to speak, and then run to avert what happened next, but my legs wouldn't move and my mouth couldn't open, except to reply to Leah's previous statement. "I don't know, but I'm not moving unless he says so. You trust him? I'd bet her for $1,000. And then clouds began to roll in, and the stilted shadows of the trees began to curl in toward us like a giant's fingers. This is when I realized how trapped and desperate I really was. I couldn't change, alter, or leave this repeating situation. Only think about how wrong it was. Soon the whooshing of leaves and snapping of branches sounded out as Noah approached. "Okay, the older German began. Old German. I just realized that this is how I mentally described him earlier in this moment, verbatim. So, you've come to see the macabre, scary stuff? A refracting prism. Everything happening all over again. Yay, Lieh replied with trepidation. You're about to confront it. It's bad. So if you want, we can take another path. No, I want to see it. Leah speaking my words. We came across a man, just out of our blind spot, dangling by the neck from a tree, 20 feet above our head. Underneath, the 7-foot-tall bust of a genderless figure with enormous angel wings carved from stone. It seems I'm able to type and think, but nothing else. I type each of these sentences one at a time, in the endless loop of moments where I console her over the trauma of seeing a swinging corpse. My phone is going to die, and I'm sure at some point I will too. I don't know about Leah or Noah. As far as I can tell, they're merely a spool of infinite, unspliced scenes from some either seraphic or malicious film reel. I'm staring at them through an unending chasm of mirrors, stepped into one by one. We walk to a point where Noah stops us, and we're back to the inevitable beginning. Stay here until I come back, he whispers, in fairly certain that the only way out of this is the solution of the nameless suicide victim. However, one thing has been left unsaid. Until now. As my phone drains below its current 1% status, he'll let it be known that Leah and I have much more in common than previously mentioned. When I was 10 years old, my little brother went missing. We couldn't find him for 3 days, and during those 3 days, our mom wept. Finally, she left to go to the store, but before doing so went into the closet. Brandon was twirling in slow concentric circles, blue and hanging lifeless from the beam. Almost everything that has happened to her has happened to me. And this, right here, I believe, the inevitable culmination of it all. Because ever since, the trauma has left me with my greatest fear being witness to another hanging. I believe this place is truly evil. I still ponder exactly how this man could hang himself so high into the trees. Maybe that is the unique purpose of those who fly with no legs. Somewhere inside a parallel prism, Leah is experiencing the exact same nightmare as me right this moment. So now, I'm leaving this phone up against this anonymous fur amidst a sea of impossibly identical furs. Even wildlife is trapped here. Eventually these thoughts will leave my mind and will fall desperately and sink into these spirals of reliving my worst nightmare over and over. Probably the most profound thing Leah and I share. And so it goes, on and on. The curse of the junkie. Inject, nod, inject, nod. Is that really any different from this? Spiral in, spiral out. I live in the PA wilds. There's more than just the natural in these woods. The Appalachian mountain range is ancient, and what many people would consider folklore has more meaning here than many places. I always tell people that North Central PA is a magical place, but I'm not sure they understand that I mean that more literally than not. We have a lake built over an Indian burial ground. Johnny Cash made a song about it. A triple continental divide. Tales of Civil War gold just gone missing. Tales of mobsters living in our area during Prohibition. Old growth forests. Miles and miles of empty land. Even our own inbred family. This story isn't about them and won't be. I've heard from everyone who's met the few that remain that they are nice people, just a bit off. I guess I'll start this off by talking about what I call wild spirits. The first time I ever encountered one was in my youth. It's hard to say when exactly now, as many childhood years seem to run together. But if I had to guess, I would say I was 6 or 7. The memory of this day will stick with me forever though. It was either the summer of or summer after my parents divorced and I was living with my sister, mother, grandma and grandpa in their house on what used to be my grandmother's father's farm. As we often did as children, my sister and I went off to play in the creek near the original farmhouse where my grandma had grown up. We had made and broke many little dams on that stream over the years, along with catching crayfish, salamanders and the occasional frog. This day, however, we decided to head further upstream than normal, up past our great-grandfather's old rock crusher. I was flipping rocks, looking for crayfish when a shadow was cast over me. I didn't look for a bit up, assuming it was my sister. When I did look up, my breath caught in my throat across the creek from me. Not 4 feet away it was dog. Now I say a dog, because it was either the biggest damn coyote I've ever seen in my 30 years of life, or a wolf, but they're not supposed to live here anymore. I'm sure some of you are thinking that it probably just looked that way because I was small, or because I was scared, but I assure you that's not it. I spent most of my life in these woods, from the time I could walk even to today, being an avid outdoorsman. I've been closer than 4 feet to coyotes many times, both alive and dead, even scruffed an exhausted one, and helped it swim across a lake when I had boat. This dog, though, it was different, not just bigger. It was staring at me as I was frozen there, its golden eyes boring into my own as if searching my soul for what I don't know, but at the time I figured it was looking for its chance to strike. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but all of a sudden I heard my sister yell my name and my head jerked to look for her, either for help or to warn her. She was just coming around a bush at a bend just downstream from me, and when I looked back to where the dog had been, it was simply gone. No noise, not any indication it had ever been there. I asked my sister if she had seen it, and she just looked at me confused. I told my grandparents about it, but all they told me is that I shouldn't be playing that far into the woods. The next time I encountered one was a few years later, fishing with my father. We were fishing down one of the streams that feed into the lake I mentioned earlier, just coming to where it opens up into the lake. Growing up in the 90s and seeing quicksand in tons of shows, I should have been watching where I was walking better. However, I waded out into the start of the lake, where I couldn't see any rocks or vegetation on the lake floor, and before I realized it, I was sinking. The mud and muck were up to my knees and the water was coming into my hip boots when I saw it. It being a muskie as best I can describe it. It darted at me, shocking me into falling over and under the water. Anyone that fishes this lake knows they're in there and knows generally what they look like. Except this one was gold, and as it swam past me, I could swear it had human eyes and an intelligence greater than a fish should possess. As the fish swam away, I realized that I was buoyant enough to slide my legs out of my hip boots, allowing them to flatten out and me being able to pull them up out of the mire. I got back to shore winded and soaked, but simply told my dad that I had slipped off a log and fell in, not sure how to explain what had happened. The third one I have encountered and sometimes still do is a bit different from the first two. I've never felt threatened by it or even that uneasy, but it definitely doesn't want to interact. In the area that my family and I hunt, there's a spot we call the Big Swamp. There's a few odd things about the swamp. For starters, it is on top of a hill. I'm not sure if it's the clay underneath that just doesn't let the water drain properly or what, but it's the only place I've personally seen like it. Second is that once you're about 15 feet off the path, even in winter when there is no leaves, you can't see the path anymore. Actually, unless you find one of the few large trees in the area, or stumble into one of the clearings where the ground is too wet to support much more than sphagnum moss. This usually includes your feet. It's hard to see past 15 feet in any direction. This leads to the third oddity: GPS. Doesn't seem to work properly inside the swamp. It took me over 16 years of hunting there to finally be able to come out onto the road where I want, and I still get turned around inside many times when I go in. I don't have a nice GPS, just Google Maps on my phone. I've tried to use it to help me get through, but for some reason it doesn't help at all. It has shown me right by the road, but it's taken me 15 minutes to get out, and it's shown me a quarter mile back, but I'm at the road in just a few steps. The fourth oddity, which may not be that odd considering the previous 3 points, is that no one outside of my family ever hunts that area. I do mention this for a reason though. We run into families that have hunt out there for as many generations as mine, and they hunt all around the swamp, but never in it, even with them seeing us get at least one deer out of there each year. I've never even come across a boot print that I didn't know was from my dad, uncles, cousin, or myself in there. However, I have seen other footprints. Now to get down to the spirit that lives in the swamp. She, and yes, I'm fairly sure it's a she, and I have never interacted per se. I've seen her and I'm fairly sure she watches us in there, but we've never met face to face. I've seen long dark hair moving away from me at the edge of where I can see faster than a person should be able to move in the swamp. I've seen various animal legs through the underbrush, and when I've reached that spot, there's been a human-shaped footprint, and I'm sure I've seen bare human feet through the underbrush through my periphery, shadowing my movements through the scrubs. I've never gone in looking for her and don't intend to try. She seems content to stay away from us, and I think the reason it is so hard to find your way through is that she doesn't want to be found. I'm not going to tempt fate and the supernatural and possibly anger her. There's so many things that go on in these woods that we have no idea about. These are just a few that I personally have seen. It's time for me to go to bed, however, so I'll leave off there for now. Maybe I'll tell you all more another time. The trees outside my window get closer every night. Trees could move in a forest every night, and you probably wouldn't even notice. There are thousands of the things in even a small forest. You couldn't possibly know the position of everyone. Sure, if your go-to spot had moved, you might be suspicious, but even then, if you don't go often, you'd probably just think you misremembered. Forests have few exact landmarks. It's the same all around. You'd be forgiven for not noticing the change, for not noticing that the trees are alive. But when they're at the edge of your window, bridging between the vast empty black of the night and the safety of your own home, you'll notice. When the outside world can tap upon your glass, you notice those things. Child cries, "I think I heard a noise at the window." The mother consoles, "It's just a branch in the breeze, honey. Go back to sleep." You read that and feel relief from the explanation. I read that and feel fear. What could be worse than a tree at the window? A tree that was not there yesterday.
I've lived on the edge of Inwoods for over a decade. It acts as the border to the west of our small town. There's my street, with Inwoods just beyond the back fencing. The woods continue for miles until the next town. They attempted to chop down the trees a few years back to expand our quaint neighborhood. The project was cancelled after just a few days, in favor of expanding east instead.
What made them change their minds? What did they find that made them want to head in the exact opposite direction? They are afraid of something in those trees. Deep within the roots, manifesting in the bark, perhaps even the leaves themselves. As they gracefully sway unsuspectingly, they have every right to be terrified. We all do. But I wasn't always scared of inwards. Quite the opposite, actually. I had a friend. Her name was Emily. We used to play in the woods often, as children. Climbing the trees, building dens. Nobody knew that place like us. If trees had moved back then, we have known about it. I wish I could still hold those memories fondly. But knowing what I know of the woods now, I cannot in good conscience look back and smile. One memory does stick out to me in particular though. A special destination that I always held near and dear to my heart. A few minutes walk through the woods, staying on the dirt path and keeping to the clearings. There's a big tree. It stands alone proudly, as if there is something different about it. A forest by definition is a large group of trees, but this one didn't feel like part of it. It was a tree in a forest, yes, but it was not a part of the forest it resided in. This was its own thing. It was special. It quickly became our go-to spot, and one day we marked it as our own by carving our initials into the bark. W. Emily went missing in those same woods just a few days later. It was our last time together. I think about it a lot. I was 12 at the time. My parents didn't let me join the local search parties. They told me I'd be scared. I convinced them to let me join just once, and my reaction to what I saw seemed to prove them right. They thought it was a sign of my trauma, but it wasn't. It was the core. The big tree was gone. Where our initials once etched into a monument of nature itself was now nothing. Emptiness. Of course, nobody knew the woods like me and Emily. Trees don't move, everyone told me. You're scared. It's okay, we all are. But trees don't move. It only took me 14 years to prove them wrong. The woods began their creeping a little over a month ago. I was getting ready for bed, yet as my glance fell over the window, I noticed a tree over the fence, one that was not there before. The first tree to take a midnight walk. At least, the first I had noticed in over a decade. I found myself watching expectantly, but expectant of what I'm not sure. I thought maybe I could catch it moving, morphing in the moonlit nighttime air, but it just stood there, staring back at me. Make no mistake, this tree was staring. No eyes to see, but staring all the same. It felt like it wasn't a part of the forest. A tree in a forest that it does not belong to is a curious thought to some, but a feeling I'm used to. Every night, when I went to bed, I would look out the window. More and more trees from the forest seemed to inch closer to my property. Each time they stopped feeling like a part of the woods. Their membership to that club ends the moment they begin the move. They are their own collective once they do. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't even sure what to say. People thought I was crazy for implying that trees move as a child. Imagine what they'd think if I said it now. But a fact not spoken is a fact all the same. There is a horrifying thing one learns about forests when they begin to shift. They make noise. I wish I could say that it was simply a rustling or creaking as they reroute to their new location. That would almost be peaceful. They make noises that get burnt into your brain. They screech, they roar, they groan in pain. Their loud whispers whimper through the air every night, reminding us that they are on the move. Their mournful lullaby does everything but help me sleep. They distill a fear in me that I haven't truly felt for 14 years. I knew this was connected to Emily's disappearance all that time ago. I'm not the only one that hears the noises, although I'm the only one who truly listens to their meaning. Many of my neighbors have put their houses up for sale already, because they cannot stand the nightly symphony of nature. That's what they call it, nature. Nothing about this is natural. I knew the trees were specifically targeting me after just a week. Nobody else had trees at their window, except me. Once at my home, at the edge of what I call my own, they stopped getting closer. They moved every night, continuing their echoes, but they did not break through my walls to reach me. The gentle tapping of branches upon my window had an eerie rhythm to them, as if someone were knocking, asking to be let in. I could almost feel their roots below the ground, beating like veins in flesh. It only took 2 nights of that before I decided to chop the branches. I knew they'd just grow back or move to a new position, but I needed to try it. That's when I discovered why the expansion of our town was cancelled. Blood dripped from the branches as I cut them. This was not sap. This was red, oozing blood. It smelt metallic, and groans could be heard from deep within the forest with every chop of my tools. I had become the conductor of this symphony. For every chop, a loud, horrific screech echoed throughout the woods. It only took 5 before I couldn't continue. You may have noticed that I haven't referred to it as Inwoods for a while. That's because, as far as I'm concerned, this is no longer Inwoods. There is not a single tree that has remained in its spot. They have all chosen to disconnect themselves from Inwoods by moving inwards, towards our town and my life. I'd considered selling with my neighbors, but despite all the new questions I had, this was the closest I had ever come to answering Emily's disappearance. Last week, I had a dream. I hadn't dreamt in a while, or even slept much for that matter. I dreamt of Emily, now an adult, playing among the trees. We had gone into the woods together to remind ourselves of our childhood. Isn't this fun? Emily spoke with an unclear voice in this dream, almost groans. But I could still understand her. This is, I said, vaguely aware of the real world, acutely knowing that I was sleeping. I just wish you could really be here. Perhaps I never left. Perhaps I'd been trying to find my way back to you. We stared at each other before she spoke again. Perhaps you can join me. I jolted awake to the sound of the tapping at my window and the distant choir of the forest. Yet something about this tapping felt different, almost more excited than usual. It scraped along my window after each one, as if to no longer ask to come in, but instead to invite me outside. I peeked through the window. Many of the trees had moved away from my home. Only one was right outside. I was still tired and my vision felt crooked, but I could clearly make out the letters engraved into the bark. W. For a second I felt calm. I felt the fear of the past 14 years drift away. Emily, I spoke aloud. The forest responded with whispers that felt more gentle this time. I made my way downstairs and out the back of the house. I walked right up to the big tree and placed my hand over our initials. For just a moment there was peace. The groans stopped, as did the tapping of the window. I felt a pressure tightening in my hand at the surface of my palm and fingertips. A creaking sound came not from the forest, but from this very spot on the big tree. It was growing around my hand. It wanted me to join it. It wanted me to become a part of the woods, my veins tangling with the roots, my thoughts tangling with the leaves. I pulled away, bits of skin tearing from the outer layers of my hand. The pain I felt was shared. The creaking returned from the forest, louder than I had ever heard it. The forest is not Emily. Emily would not put me in a position like that. She would not ask me to give up my life to become something I am not. I believe the woods have tangled with Emily's memories. That which she was fond of is now what the trees are fond of. Pieces of her mind scattered across Inwoods the day she vanished. But her soul is not there. A collective network of trees have been given the gift of thought, and it is terrifying. If you see a snowman in the forest, leave immediately. I live in a small town in Romania. My retired neighbor, let's call him Pavel, used to be a high school history teacher back in the days. He told me a story about one of his trips in the woods back in the 80s, before the fall of the communist regime. I've recorded it and told him that we should upload it somewhere. He agreed as long as I won't give his identity away. So, with the exception of some names that I've changed, I wrote down an exact transcript of his story. My neighbor's story transcript. Back in 1988, I was living in Brasov. I understand that some people might not be too familiar with our region, so I'll make it clear. It's a small city in southeastern Transylvania, in the Carpathians. It's only a short trip away from the Bran Castle. Many tourists may know it as Dracula's Castle. A beautiful place with a lot of history. Our teacher told us a lot about it. We were planning to visit it together sometime, but we ended up doing something different. That year, on December 30th, some of my ex-classmates and I went for a 3-day trip in the woods. We were celebrating the 10 years that passed since we graduated high school. We were brought together by Mr. Dima, our history teacher. He didn't have any family, so he was very fond of his students, and he always dedicated most of his time to teaching. Plenty of teachers back then were pretty rough, but he was different. He was like a bigger brother to us. He knew how to turn any piece of history into an amazing story, and he always knew what to say whenever any of us was troubled. So, we were all very excited to celebrate the new year by throwing a big party somewhere remote with our favorite mentor. There were 7 of us. Mr. Dima, of course, our big brother, who arranged everything. Then there were Vladimir, Paul, David, Ema, and Diana. Vladimir was the troublemaker that was usually the ringleader behind most of our shenanigans. Ironic to think that he became a prison guard. Paul and David were the two brothers and pranksters in our class. We've spent so many weekends at their place, since their dad had a VCR. You know, back in the 80s, plenty of American films were banned or censored, so you had to get your hands on tapes that were smuggled from the West. Not to mention that a VCR back then was so overpriced, it would usually cost as much as a car. Most of us didn't speak English too well, so we used to watch dubbed versions. There was this lady, Irina Margareta Nestor, that dubbed a couple thousand movies all by herself. Look her up if you don't believe me. It was so goofy, watching Terminator and hearing her high-pitched voice dubbing Schwarzenegger's lines, but it had a charm of its own. You know, where were we? Right, Paul and David. And then, there was Ema, the fun and charming girl. You know, the kind of girl that all the boys had a crush on. Well, most of the boys anyways. She was the competitive one, always getting herself involved in any contest or project that was going on. Although, personally, I was paying more attention to Diana. She was the reserved type, a little bit nerdy, a little bit of a hopeless romantic. She read a lot of novels, and she had Mr. Demas' talent being a great storyteller. I didn't tell her that I had a thing for her. Well, no point in crying about it now, is it? And, of course, the last one in the party, me. They nicknamed me Mousy, due to a tooth I've lost back in the 10th grade. My obsessive interest in history didn't help either. Most of my colleagues became accountants, factory workers, or in Vladimir's case, a prison guard. So, during this trip, I was standing out as the new history teacher. The guy that may replace Mr. Dima at some point. Our teacher's brother-in-law was a forest ranger, so he knew about this log cabin, somewhere up in the mountains. The place used to be a gathering point for forest rangers, and lost tourists could also spend the night there. As it turns out, the place had a decent supply of liquor and firewood, so any lost hitchhiker could seek refuge there. The rangers were pretty sure that nobody would turn up in the coming days, so they decided to rent us the cabin for a decent price. Of course, the whole thing was illegal, and done behind the back of their chief. But it's not like he would ever find out. They were all probably going to get drunk and spend the days at the ranger's lodge, far away from the cabin. It was a 4-hour walk through the frozen woods. We've lost half an hour or so going off the road, since it was snowing like crazy, but the trip was sure worth it. We arrived at a 2-story cabin, close to a narrow river. I think it was the one they called Valea Dragovenilo. I'm not sure. The place felt very welcoming. It had a nice view of the river and the little grove below. The main room had a long table with 12 seats. The walls were covered with all sorts of decorations and hunting trophies. It felt almost like the home of some Viking warrior. Well, a Viking with finer taste, that is. There were a lot of games lying around, an improvised pool table, and even one of those table football games. It was the first time we were seeing something like it. We didn't even know what it was. I guess we were more interested in all the liquor in the basement. After an hour or so, Mr. Dima sent Vladimir and I outside to gather some firewood. It looked like it would get very cold in the coming days, so we needed to stock up before we were struck by a snowstorm. As we were walking around the cabin, picking up twigs and branches, Vladimir couldn't keep it to himself and told me, "If I were you, I'd make sure I pick a bed that isn't too squeaky. If you know what I mean." "What are you on about?" I asked, even though I knew what he meant. "I don't know. You seem a little bit too curious about somebody in particular. You're imagining things. You haven't changed a bit. You still have a thing for Diana, don't you? What's it to you? Maybe I can help you out with this, you know? Maybe you can help me out as well." I should have known he was up to something. He wasn't the kind of guy to help you out without getting his reward one way or another. He continued, "Well, Diana and Ema will probably want to share the same bedroom, you know how those two are. But if you manage to get Diana to spend the night with you, you know, then Ema would need a new roommate. Diana's engaged, you nitwit." I told him, "So what? It's a one-night thing. Come on." All that time you spent around the prison turned. I stopped, realizing that there was a weird silhouette nearby, watching us from behind the trees. It was hard to see with all the snowfall, but there was something there, all right. Vladimir saw it too. "Who's there?" I asked. No response. We got closer. We were both armed with logs we found lying around. To our relief, we realized that we were spooked by a snowman. It didn't have a carrot, its nose was just another twig, but otherwise, it looked just like any snowman, with a smiley face made out of pieces of coal. It was creepy, I have to admit. It was built pretty close to the pathway on which we came, so we should have noticed it before. We've also noticed that it was wearing a grey hat, similar to the ones worn by the local rangers. We just presumed that Paul and David found the hat inside the cabin and were pulling a prank on us, as they always did back in high school. We returned to the cabin, and of course when asked about it, they said that they don't know anything about the snowman. In the evening, we were having dinner together. Mr. Dima brought his old guitar, so we took turns trying to play something. Of course, Vladimir took the chance to try and impress Emma, always the charmer. Too bad that he was too drunk to play anything. A couple of hours later, most people were already going to sleep. Diana and I were the only ones left, sitting by the fireplace. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I woke up all of a sudden. Diana was sleeping next to me. It took me a second to realize that David woke me up. He looked a little worried. I asked him what's wrong.
Hey, so, have you guys seen Paul around? He asked.
No, I've been sleeping until you woke me up, I answered, angry that he ruined my sleep. Can we go have a look around? And getting worried. Just as David said that, the entrance door creaked open. Paul stepped in. He didn't seem to notice us or care about us. He just walked past us, going straight to bed. David, if this was supposed to be another one of your stupid pranks, I mumbled, still half asleep. No, wait. I didn't know he was outside, David answered, sounding very defensive. I've just told him to get lost and to let me get some sleep. But no chance for that. Early in the morning, I get woken up, again by David. He told me to follow him. We both went to his bedroom. Paul was not around. There was also something very weird on the bed. There was a puddle of water on the left side of the bed, and there were a bunch of twigs lying around, on the bed and on the floor. And then, some small pieces of a black rocky thing. At first I thought it was coal, but after touching it, it felt cold and a little mushy. It wasn't hard enough to be coal. If this was one of Paul's pranks, I have to admit, it was a pretty good one, because we were creeped out. Still, I was expecting any minute that he'd just jump out from one of the windows and give us a heart attack. A couple of hours later, everybody woke up. After finding out that Paul's not around, and since it became pretty clear that David was honest, Mr. Dima told us to get ready. We would go out and look for him. Luckily, the cabin had what we needed for a situation like this. We'd split into 2 teams of 3 people. Each of us would get some length of rope and tie it around a steel pole just outside the cabin. The blizzard was getting pretty strong, and we couldn't risk getting lost in the woods. So, by carrying that rope, we'd easily find our way back. We only had a few hundred meters of rope each, but it had to do. Mr. Dima, Diana and I headed east, just over the river, while David, Vladimir and Emma went west. We took the hunting rifles in the attic. Vladimir had some experience with guns from his training as a prison guard, and Mr. Dima was in the army, so they knew what they were doing. While we were walking around the woods, Diana and I were trying to come up with all sorts of explanations for what happened. At the end of the day, there was still a chance that Paul was screwing with us. But still, we had to look for him. Maybe he was having a hangover and decided to have a walk around the area. We've also considered that Paul might be a sleepwalker and went out there while asleep. He did ignore us when he returned last night. After all, while we were searching, we heard something echoing in the distance. It came from the western side of the forest. A deep and constant whistling sound, almost like the sound made by a large plane that passes by. It didn't make sense for a plane to fly around that forest, especially in that kind of weather. There was something off about it, but we didn't give it too much thought. We still had to find Paul. After another hour or so of searching, we headed back to the cabin. The other group didn't return yet. We could see that their rope was still dangling, so they were probably still searching, heading deeper into the forest. The 3 of us decided to sit by the fire, to warm up for a while, before heading into the forest for another search. Mr. Dima seemed more worried than ever. He was visibly shaken by Paul's disappearance. As we were sharing our thoughts, I brought up the snowman Vladimir and I saw by the river. Mr. Dima didn't seem too interested at first, simply shrugging it off as the creation of some tourists that probably spent the night in the cabin. That was until I mentioned the grey hat that it was wearing. He asked me to show him. We went all outside and headed south, and after a short walk, we found the snowman right where we first seen it. Mr. Dima grabbed the grey hat, cleared it of its snow to inspect it, and after a short while I could see him growing visibly concerned. "This is Rada's hat," he said, his voice shaking anxiously. "Who?" I asked, even though I had a feeling that I'd better not know. "Radu. He was one of the rangers that was on shift these days. This is his hat. Maybe Paul or somebody found it inside the cabin." I tried to reason. "No, Radu was on his shift yesterday. They don't leave their uniforms inside the cabin." As we were there, I felt the need to grab one of the pieces of coal placed on the snowman's face. I had an intuition about something, and sadly, I was right. The pieces of coal placed on this snowman had the same mushy, soft feeling to them, like the ones we found in Paul's bed. I didn't tell the others. I just told them that we should find the other group immediately. As we returned to the cabin, we realized that their rope was no longer stretching, so that meant they must be returning. Nevertheless, we decided to follow the rope. We had to find them as quickly as possible. We were walking at a quick pace. Mr. Dima was leading us, pointing his rifle forward, just in case. We agreed that as soon as we will get back to the cabin, we will pack up and head to the nearest village and call the authorities. While we were heading west, Diana asked us if we've heard about the New Year's assassin. Of course we did. Back then, there was a serial killer that had this nickname due to his modus operandi. Every year on the night of December 31st, he killed a child in the city of Bozo, 3 hours away from Brasov. He started his murder spree in 1985, and every year on December 31st, he would strike. The snowman. It just made sense to be the artwork of some crazed serial killer. But why would he show up here all of a sudden? As we were discussing this horrifying scenario, Mr. Dima stumbled, almost falling into the snow. He stepped on something in the snow. We've gathered around, trying to have a better look. After clearing some of the snow, it became clear what it was. A human lying on the ground. And after we turned it around, we realized it was Ima. We checked her pulse. She was gone. Her eyes were blank and devoid of life, and her skin was pale, almost like the snow. And then I saw some aspect that horrified me. Looking at her hands, the tips of her fingers, they were rough looking and hard to the touch, almost like the bark of a tree. Diana started yelling, staring forward into the snowstorm. Mr. Dima jumped, his rifle aimed straight forward. There was something dead ahead, something in the distance, not too far away from us. Mr. Dima shouted, calling Vladimir and David, but he received no response. As we were looking forward, we realized what we were seeing. There in the distance were 2 snowmen, not even fully taking in what we just saw. Almost simultaneously, the 3 of us started running towards the cabin. We had to get out of there fast. No time to think about it. We wanted to take some supplies and go, but then we decided it would be better to leave everything behind and just run towards the nearest ranger outpost. So, we deviated from the original route and went south, on the pathway, not even stopping for a second when we saw the cabin. We were running so quickly, I turned my head to see if anybody was following us, and bumped into something and I fell to the ground. I got up immediately. Looking down, I realized that it was the snowman I found yesterday. I've seen those pieces of coal from up close now, and it just clicked. I remembered one of my trips in the woods, when my uncle got his left foot frozen, and he eventually had to amputate it. Those weren't pieces of coal, they were lumps of human flesh, destroyed by frostbite. As we were descending down the mountain, we heard it again, the deep whistling noise. We didn't turn, we just kept going. After some time, I don't know, it felt like ages, we've reached one of those skiing spots. Nobody was around, since the snowstorm forced them to close shop. We didn't have time to equip skiing equipment, so we were looking for some sleighs. We saw a 2-person sleigh next to a wooden shed. Mr. Dima told me to grab that sleigh, take Diana and go. He said he'd find another sleigh in the shed or somewhere. Without realizing it, I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know why. I suppose I knew that this might be the last chance I have to talk to him." I got the sleigh in position and told Diana to get behind me. As she did, she had a look back, and she started screaming loudly. I wanted to turn, but she grabbed my head and covered my eyes. I could also hear Mr. Dima screaming, and then I could feel the earth slipping below me. We were starting to drift downwards. I grabbed Diana's hands and removed them so I could see. As we were plunging through the snow, I heard a loud gunshot, and then the whistle, again. But this time it was very loud and sharp. Then came another gunshot, and then the same whistle. I was drifting the sleigh left and right, trying to dodge the trees in our way, and then before we knew it, we were launched way up in the air. And then, I only remember everything fading to black. I woke up on January 2nd in a hospital room in Brosov. I was told by a medic that Diana and I suffered both head traumas. We were out cold for a couple of days. We told the police what happened, although I doubt they took us very seriously. In fact, I was worried they might have sent us to the sanatorium if we insisted too much. We were released from the hospital a week later. The police and the rangers combed the forest, but to this day nobody managed to find our friends. I wish I had an explanation for you, but I don't. I don't understand anything that happened, and I don't have the strength to keep searching for an answer. I can only offer you a piece of advice. If you ever see snowmen in the forest, it would be better to leave immediately. There would be one more thing. A few months after this terrible incident, Diana told me that the head trauma might have been a blessing in disguise for her. It made her forget some of the things she saw. She showed me a drawing of what she saw in the forest that day. You can describe it, but I ask you that you never show it to anyone. Please, the drawing. My neighbor handed me a piece of paper covered in pencil sketches. As requested, I won't post it here, but I will describe it. The figure in the drawing has a humanoid form, an approximate humanoid form, although it is rather emaciated, slim, and tall. Two arms that are elongated and thin are stretching all the way down to the ground. The torso looks bulkier, and by the look of it, appears to be a mix of snow and tree branches. Overall, the legs and the arms appear somewhat interrupted, as if pieces of twigs and tree branches are floating around the torso, or they are mixed with snow and ice. And on top of the monstrosity, there is a head. It resembles the head of a woman, except some of its features appear upside down. The mouth appears to be above the eyeballs, which are two perfect white circles, and the hair is curly, unkempt and raised all the way up, and all over its skin, on its arms, legs, torso, and head. The figure appears to be covered in small black circular shapes, like small blobs or mold. I'm a private investigator in rural Oregon. A missing person that doesn't exist has just been found. Most people make the stereotype that private detectives and investigators have walk-in clients, but that simply isn't true. I get almost all of my cases from clients by phone, and the call I got in that June was no exception. In 2016, I was working as a private investigator in rural Oregon. The client, a man named Jonathan Alexander, was calling about the disappearance of his father, Sergio Alexander. Jonathan's father had gone missing ever since a solo deer hunting trip in the backwoods of our little Oregon town, and the search parties and official parties hadn't turned up anything, and the woods can be a dangerous place. In most cases like this, you're looking for a body in the woods, not a live person. But Jonathan was hopeful, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. In this case, I took my go bag, a duffel bag, and its contents were a bottle of water, a first aid kit, my Taurus Raging Hunter, a bag of Ziploc bags, my wallet and phone, and food. A Taurus Raging Hunter revolver might have been overkill, but I was planning to go into the woods. As I pulled up into his dirt driveway, I got a sense of the kind of person he was. His house was a 25-foot trailer stuck to the ground, with a backyard and patio facing the mountains. This part of Oregon was stocked full of cougars, mountain lions, bears, wolves, moose, and some others, and almost everyone carried a heavier firearm when going into the backwoods. The first place on my schedule was Jonathan's house, where I would meet him in person and have an interview. "Are you Jonathan?" I asked the man waiting for me. He was tall, at least 6'5", and wearing a checkered button-up, trucker cap, and jeans. I walked inside the trailer, and the interior was everything I expected. The walls were lined with taxidermied bass and catfish, as well as several mounted deer heads and rifles propped up on display. A dirty kitchen with piles of dishes was one corner, and a small two-person dinner table. Jonathan, John for short, and I sat down. Jonathan offered me a beer, but I declined. I never drank on a job. Yeah, he replied. You're Inspector Jacob, right? Come inside. I'll tell you the details. I also have some things that could help you, depending on how willing you are. Where was he last seen? Who was with him? What happened leading up to the night of the disappearance? I started with the regular questions. John replied, telling the whole story. And where is this dirt road? My dad, Sergio, was a hunter and fisherman. Hunting and fishing was his life. He always had a rifle or a fishing rod. He's in his 60s and was in the military for 7 years. Had a few tours in Afghanistan. On that night, he wanted to go solo buck hunting in the evening, so I dropped him off in a dirt road near his favorite spot. He didn't come back for 2 days. This was somewhat normal. He sometimes hunted overnight or just got lost. After a week passed, I got really worried. I could feel that something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. I called the sheriff, and they organized a search party for 3 nights. We went in every direction, covered all the ground, and you know what? Not a single thing. Not a candy bar, no footsteps leading past his spot, no trail, nothing. After he was declared deceased, I went out myself to search. I know he's still out there. I know it. John marked the road on the GPS on my phone, and I thanked him and left. I had a no-solve, no-pay rule, so I wouldn't get paid unless I actually found Sergio, dead or alive. My next stop was at the sheriff's office, in the middle of my small town. I drove past multiple roadside stores until I reached the parking lot of the sheriff's office. I parked and walked into the place, going up to the front desk where a tall and skinny deputy was doing paperwork and chewing gum, presumably as a substitute for cigarettes. I told him that I was looking into the disappearance of Sergio Alexander, and he sent me to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a balding man in his 50s named Clyde, showed a forced smile as I walked inside. Stained American flag was pinned to the wall, along with dozens of missing person posters and wanted posters. Nah, I replied. A client wants me to find him. Sergio is the guy's dad. So, Inspector, is this missing guy a friend of yours? He asked. And what is this? I asked. Clyde reached into his desk and pulled out a stack of papers and photos, which I flicked through. One of the photos captured an image showing a trail of footprints ending abruptly. Well, you're in luck, Clyde replied. We haven't gotten much criminal activity, so I can show you some of the search party reports. It's the strangest part of the case. The footprints leading to Sergio's favorite hunting spot just stopped. No trail leading somewhere else. No tire tracks. No ATV tracks. Nothing. It's like he just up and vanished into thin air. This is the entire area in which we estimate that Sergio could have walked around in the time he was gone, Clyde stated. We checked every bit of it, and guess what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But there was one thing we found of interest. I sighed. This case was going to be a hard one. What else of interest was there? I asked, looking through the files. Clyde pulled out a satellite image of the woods with a Sharpie written on the spot where Sergio had gone missing. There was a pattern. Every time we checked a place, we heard Sergio's radio coming from somewhere. Which is? I asked. I raised an eyebrow. Sheriff Clyde continued. But it was very, very faint. Could barely hear it. And another strange thing was when we went to search for Sergio in the entire area where he went missing, all the birds and animals were quiet. Even the crickets. As soon as we left the area of the supposed disappearance, the sound all came back. I checked the watch. It was early evening. After jotting down all the notes I could gather, I thanked the sheriff and left. My next stop, the woods. The place was exactly as John had described it. It was extremely rural, just a few miles away from a mountain range, and it was completely silent. The forest should have been alive with birds chirping, wild turkeys moving about, crickets chirping. But the night was dead. Turning on my headlamp, I found Sergio's footsteps from when he was last seen and started combing through the area. By the time I pulled up to the dirt road in my pickup truck, it was well into getting dark. This wasn't the ideal time for me to search through the area and find clues. Every detective knows how important the first 45 hours are. Just like Clyde and Jonathan had said, the trail abruptly stopped in the middle of the woods. Nothing, no other signs that Sergio was even there. It was as if he just up and vanished. Suddenly, I heard some rustling behind me. It was fully dark by now, and nobody should have been there beside me. The sound came again, except it was now in front of me, but just out of the reach of my headlamp. Who's there? I yelled. Show yourself. I'm armed. For dramatization, I flicked the revolver holster from my Taurus on my belt. Suddenly, something tapped me right on the back. I didn't have time to pull out my gun, and considering that whoever was doing this was probably some drunk guy, I wouldn't need it. I turned and threw a Mike Tyson haymaker in the thing's direction, and ended up hitting a tree and nearly breaking my wrist. In the split second that I was proud of my Mike Tyson haymaker, I realized that I had punched a tree and that my knuckles were actually bleeding. Whoever was behind me, if there was someone behind me, they were long gone. And that was when the laughing started. Weird, crazy, and unnatural cackling. Whatever you'd call it, it was unsettling anyway. I pulled out my revolver designed to drop bears and fired a deafening shot into the air. The laughing, everything stopped for a bit, and I almost put my guard down. Then I heard something whisper, just an inch away from my ear. Actually, it was more like cackling. It said, "OTC, Hajchantabi's Ixi Patsri." There was a huge blurry shape running after me, dark as the night, and fuzzy around the edges. It was as if somebody took a huge mass of static from an 80s TV, made it into some sort of creature, and put it on a dirt road at 9 o'clock to chase some poor private investigator. I turned the road, drove down the road, until I reached the town. The thing was obviously gone, and the next thing I know, I hear the sound of a million running footsteps catching up to me, and I GTFO. I ran right out of the woods, fast enough to outrun Usain Bolt. Adrenaline is one heck of a drug. I jumped in my pickup truck, turned the engine and peeled out of there, all in record time. Whatever was behind me was still chasing me, behind the car. I looked into the rearview mirror to try to look at the thing, which was running at least 80 miles per hour to keep up with me, and I saw nothing. Well, it wasn't a conceptual nothing. It was nothing in the sense that it was nothing my brain could comprehend and understand. I parked at a gas station parking lot and threw up once my body realized how much running I had done. The next day, I headed to a woman named Meredith's house. I had heard about her from when I was at the bar the night I saw the demon thing by some paranormal junkies who were particularly interested in what I said. Meredith apparently owned a tea and plant shop at the edge of town, having the shop based on the first floor of her house. She also knew a thing or two about paranormal entities, the occult, monsters, ghouls, and, well, you get the gist. I pulled up into the driveway of her shop and knocked on the door. "We're closed, asshole." Somebody, probably Meredith, yelled. I looked at the store hours taped on the front door. Today was a Friday, and according to her, probably outdated store hours chart, she was, as a matter of fact, open. Meredith groaned and opened the triple lock door. In person, she was a short Latino woman with long black hair and a purple beanie, and wearing a trench coat and jeans, which was totally not suspicious. "You're open, so stop being lazy," I yelled right back. "What I want is to know what is in those woods. And lady, don't piss me off. I'm still on a hangover. You study the paranormal and supernatural, or am I wrong?" "What do you want?" she snapped. "No, you're not wrong." Meredith's face went pale. "Good. Because yesterday I got bullied and chased by some weird demon thing while looking for a missing man in his 60s. I taught myself how to learn and read expressions people make, and by the looks of it, she knew exactly what I was talking about. Come in, I might be able to help you." Like Jonathan's house, I was easily able to tell the interior of the house from the inside. There were plants everywhere, on the walls, growing in giant pots on the floor, as well as shelves stocked full of beakers and test tubes, and a few bags full of strange substances. I sat down on a worn-out couch while Meredith assessed my situation. "First of all, who told you about me?" she asked. "Some British fella named Ron," I said. But then again, I was drunk, so he might have been a John or Bob. "How did you say this thing looked like?" I answered plainly. "No." I looked at it through the rearview mirror, and even then I couldn't see it well. "Did you look at it directly?" Meredith asked. "Big dark, blurry. I couldn't actually see it since it was at least 100 feet away, but it was running 80 miles per hour, whatever it was. Huge, must have been over 20 feet big. What you just described is what we in the business call negalaquis." "What was that?" I asked. "Must be why you're alive." "Then how do I kill this thing?" I asked. "I need to close this case." "Negalaquis," I muttered. "The heck is that?" "No one really knows," Meredith replied. "He, she, whatever Negalaku is ancient. has been in these woods for probably over a century, and no one knows where he came from. You said that you were looking for a missing guy, right? Well, Nagalaku probably took him. Nagalaku might eat him, might let him go, might keep him for eternity. I don't know. You probably can't, Meredith said. But whatever you do, don't look directly at Nagalaku, or your mind will literally melt at the unfathomable horror, and you will die. Do not look at it. I won't look at the demon thing, I said. Gotcha. Do you have, any herbs or materials that will stop Nagalaku from hurting me or doing anything? Yes, actually I do. It's white ash blessed by a shaman. If you sprinkle it over yourself or any weapons you have, it should be more effective against any supernatural being. Meredith stood up and walked towards a cabinet and pulled out a large Ziploc bag of white ash, which seemed to glow and vibrate, and she handed it to me. This ain't free, she said. It's $100. I sighed and reached into my wallet and pulled out $100 in cash and handed it to Meredith in exchange for the white ash. Hey, Meredith called out as I packed up my stuff and headed for the door. Be careful.
Yeah?
I got out of there and drove to the gas station, where I planned to get my supplies to hunt Nagalaku and find Sergio Alexander. But before that, I needed to fuel up. I bought incendiary rounds for my revolver that the gas station surprisingly sold, and I ordered pineapple pizza while listening to Piano Man by Billy Joel. After I finished up and threw out my garbage, I had devised a plan, which involved flares, a bottle of vodka, a huge jug filled with gasoline, and a Molotov cocktail. Like that was even possible. The cashier, a guy named John, seemed very interested in the thing I bought from the gas station. He was a tall guy in his 50s, with a graying beard, a trucker cap, and a military attitude. What are all these things for? He asked, as I heaved the heavy gasoline tank onto the counter, along with some other flammable and extremely dangerous things. But John didn't see that as nothing. Oh, nothing, I answered, trying not to sound suspicious, just trying to take care of a pest problem. I was caught off guard at how easily and accurately he knew what I was doing. Yes, I replied. You're going into the woods, ain't ya? Well, I'm off work after this shift, so I'll come with you. Or I could just report to the police that a private investigator is buying suspicious amounts of flammables and gasoline, along with 45 Magnum incendiary rounds for a Taurus Raging Hunter revolver. You Army? I asked. Yeah, he replied. Been in the US Marines and the Navy for a couple of years. Had 5 tours in Afghanistan. Fine, I said. Let's do this. I didn't see any reason why John shouldn't come with me. And besides, I could use his military and combat skills, which might be useful, and I wasn't going to carry a 55-gallon tank full of gasoline in the middle of the woods alone. A few hours later, just as the sun was setting, John and I got out of my pickup truck in front of the woods. John had brought his trusty 12-gauge, packed with Dragon's Breath incendiary rounds, and a mini flamethrower. John would be my backup and the bait, while I carried the gasoline tank duct taped to an explosive Molotov cocktail. Ready? John asked. The plan was, we would go to the woods, to the spot where I had last been attacked by Sagoth, and wait. Once we heard a sign of him, we would both put on our blindfolds, to avoid having our souls sucked out by the unfathomable sight of the eldritch cosmic horror. Put on your blindfold, I said, putting on mine. We can risk seeing this thing. Yeah, I said. Just don't shoot me while you have your blindfold on. We walked into the woods in silence, and after a mile or so I reached the spot where Sergio was last seen. We sat there and waited an hour or so until all the noise suddenly stopped, and I heard the sound of something massive dragging across the forest floor. John nodded, grinned, and put the blindfold on. Whatever it was, sounded massive. It said in a demonic and ancient voice, Ejoa, said in the demonic and ancient voice, Bad, said in the demonic and ancient voice, Bad. John and I fired a shot into the direction of the voice, and although my bullet missed by a mile, the old man's shot was a direct hit. Although I couldn't hear it, I saw the light from the blast of fire, sparks and flames coming from the barrel of John's shotgun, and it hit the demon monster. The thing screeched, and we moved back a few steps, still blind. What the fuck? And without warning, the ground opened beneath us. John and I fell into the cavern beneath us. 6 feet. You okay? I asked. Never been better, John replied. What is this place? I lifted my blindfold and looked around to see that we had fallen into a subterranean tunnel that led deeper into the earth. Anyone there? Fucking help! A voice screamed. presumably Sergio's based on the circumstances. We ran down the tunnel and searched for Sergio, and we found the man lying on the cave floor with a broken leg. If you hear someone knocking on your door at night, don't answer it. The knockings were what had awoken me. 3 rapt sounds spaced equally, sounding loud and deafening to my sleep-addled brain. I lay in my bed, incapacitated and trying to get my bearings. Finally willing my body up, I got out of bed and threw a sideways glance at my bedside clock. 3:15 a.m. Who would visit me so late in the night? I considered the possibilities. I didn't have any close friends or any family left. Perhaps someone was in trouble and had come to my door for help, I thought. Opening my bedroom door and shuffling down the stairs to get to the front door, I realized something. The knocking had continued in a steady, rhythmic pace. 3 knocks, followed by a 3-second pause and then 3 knocks again, sounding looped and automated in their delivery. Creeped out at this revelation, I walked as quietly as I could towards the entrance of my house and stared through the peephole. Knock. Knock. As I peered through, I saw nothing but darkness, so I pressed my hand against the porch light switch and turned it on. Nothing. It had remained as dark as if I had never switched the light on at all. Was the light broken? I had certainly never noticed it before. Or, I thought, chills running down my spine. Whoever was knocking on my door must have intentionally blocked it, as not even the faint glow of a streetlight was visible. Knock, knock. Hello, I called out, my voice sounding small and timid against the darkness. Do you need help? I continued, waiting for some type of response. Knock, knock. Hey, if you aren't going to stop, I'll call the police. This situation was more than a little weird to me. What with the continuous knocking of the mysterious person? Knock, knock. No reply. Now, silently sweating, I began to think, what if whoever was knocking on my door were injured badly or in need of help some way? Unable to speak, I couldn't just ignore someone that could potentially be in danger, right? But that still didn't explain the peephole being blocked. Maybe they were leaning against the frame too badly to do anything except knock. And yet, I'm going to open the door, okay? Knock, knock, knock. If the person on the other side heard me, they certainly gave no indication. I slowly unlatched and unlocked my door, my hand now resting on the handle. With a deep breath, I swung the door open, only to be met with nothing. I took a step outside, confused at seeing only darkness at my door. It was then, when I was attacked. A large person, no, a large creature, because this was a creature, pushed me on my stomach, knocking the wind out of my lungs, leaving me dazed and bewildered. It turned me around, and what I saw made my blood run cold and caused me to scream like I had never before. The creature loomed tall and unnatural over me. Its face sheened with a pale glow, while its eyes, sunken and black, bore into my soul. Its limbs gangly and long, yet muscular beyond human proportions. Its skin was ashy and black, and it seemed to pull in and absorb light around us, its face hideous and horrifying. Its lips curled into a sick and cruel smile, revealing its huge and sharp teeth. I tried to scream again, to break free, to do anything, but the creature had a hold of me and did not let me move even a single inch.
You shouldn't have done that.
It cackled as it continued to push me down. You really shouldn't have opened that door, but now you've let me in. The creature's voice was low and raspy, like the creaking of wood under pressure. It leaned in closer, breathing its cold and horrible breath on my nostrils, filling it with the smell of rot and decay.
What are you?
It choked out, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling as if it may burst. You want to know what I am? It drawled, slowly building up pressure on my chest. Who or what I am is of no concern to you right now, because you see, you made the mistake of letting me in. The creature whispered into my ear, malice evident in each word it spoke, seeming to take pleasure in the fear it brought me. You invited me. I tried pushing against it, but its strength locked me in place, my efforts as futile as an ant trying to push over an elephant. The harder I pushed, the weaker my arms felt, until I could no longer feel them, and they lay at my side, weak and useless. The creature, which had so easily resisted my attempts at escape, now started devouring me, its jagged and sharp teeth facing little problem in cutting my skin and crushing my bones, filling the air with the metallic scent of blood and causing my body to rack in pain as I felt each bite tear deeper within my flesh. I tried to scream again, but all that came out was the gurgle of blood that began to pool in the back of my throat, slowly drowning me, all whilst the creature continued its feast. Panic and anxiety now began to roll over my mind in waves, causing me much terror. I'm sure it was Leverett. The creature seemed to feed off my emotions as much as my body, growing larger by the second. As it continued to feed on me, I slowly started losing consciousness, my vision flickering until the only sense I had remaining was sounds of knocking. Then, everything went black. Knock, knock. I woke up with a start on my bed, clutching my throat as I lay in a pool of my own sweat, screaming. I gasped for air, my chest heaving as the remnants of my nightmare clung to my mind like thick smoke. My throat burned and my heart pounded violently in my chest. I blinked my eyes rapidly, trying to stave off my confusion and daze while I tried to reconcile what had happened. My room was dark and dim as I cast my gaze around. I put a hand on my neck, searching for injury, and felt nothing. No blood, no marks, nothing to indicate that I had been wounded or that I had been bitten there. All that remained was my pulse beating steadily, as if nothing had happened. And yet, the sounds echoed like a gunshot in my mind. I jumped out of bed, stumbling over my bedside table and knocking it on the floor in the process, its contents scattered all over with the clock landing beside me. I scrambled to my feet, unable to believe what I was hearing. Was my dream real? Did the creature from my nightmare come to life and is now attacking me again? As these thoughts raced in my mind, I thought of one possibility, one very sick and twisted possibility. I slowly cast my gaze down towards my bedside clock, the numbers that displayed against its screen confirming my theory. No, the clock read through the same time. The knocks came once again, filling my head with its horrible loud sound. Knock, knock. I stumbled backwards, falling and only managing to catch myself before I fell out my window. At such a height, the fall could have severely injured me or more. My heart raced as the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. I was paralyzed, unable to move and unable to come to terms with my revelation. The knocks echoing ever louder in my mind. Knock. That knocking. That damned knocking. How had it followed me from the dream? Or was this a dream? Such thoughts whizzed past my head as I grappled with the reality that lay before me. Knock. Knock. But wait. The knocking seemed different somehow. The rhythm had changed. The knocking no longer following the 3-knock, 3-second pattern, but now a 2-knock, 2-second one. Knock, knock. Yes, there was no doubting it now. For some reason it had changed and now seemed louder. Knock, knock. As I suddenly realized why, I had to stop myself from vomiting. The knocking in my dream that heralded the arrival of the creature was now in my house. Knock, knock. What do I do? What do I do? The knocking echoed in my head, flooding my mind, preventing me of making any action, deafening my mind with its accursed beat. I had to run. I needed to run. If I stayed here, I would almost certainly face the same fate as before. But hell, from what I could gather, the knocking came from the hallway door opposite my bedroom door. I reached for my phone, which in all the commotion had fallen down and was now lying on the floor. No reception. I couldn't call for help. Could I attack it and then make a break for it? I thought as I scanned my room for any weapons that could possibly save me. Knock, knock. My gaze rested on an old baseball bat my dad had given me for my 13th birthday. It had to do. Creeping silently and steeling myself, I grabbed a hold of its handle and walked as silently as I could to my door. Every step I took filled me with dread and fear that I had never felt before, afraid that the creature would lunge out as I made my way. Knock, knock. Breathing deeply, I took a hold of the handle and pushed the door free, slowly, my nerves on end. Knock, knock. Nothing lay before me as I cautiously took a step outside, the knocking coming from just in front of me now. Knock, knock. I tread softly, careful not to make a noise, as I risked being found out, and before long faced the door where the knockings came from, my heart threatening to burst out my ribcage. Knock, knock. Could I do it? Could I really open the door and risk death? I had no choice. I brought my hand up as slowly and as meticulously as I could, fearing that the creature that lay just beyond sensed my presence. Sweat running down my forehead, I opened the door and swung as hard as I could, putting my entire body weight behind the action. With a crack, the bat broke in two as I was sent falling towards the floor, unable to stop my momentum. An all too familiar feeling descended on me as the creature loomed over, its figure just barely visible amidst the darkness. Task, task, tax. "You're going to have to try a little more harder than that," it said in a condescending tone as it picked me up by the shirt with one hand and threw me down the stairs. I landed with a thud, knocking the breath out of my lungs as it slowly sauntered towards where I lay. "Stay back," I yelled, shuffling my body back against the wall. "Or what?" it said in the most dreadful tone. "What are you ever going to me?" It had reached at this point, standing tall against my small shivering frame. "Oh, I'm so going to enjoy this," it giggled to itself, and as it mutilated me, my vision went black. Knock. I woke up screaming until my voice went hoarse. What had happened?" I struggled to collect my thoughts as my heart pounded in my ears. Knock. No. Knock. This has to be another dream. This just has to be, right? Knock. The darkness seemed to melt all around me as I focused my gaze onto my bedroom door. Knock. The knocking. That cursed, relentless knocking that had tormented me at my front door now echoed at the door of my bedroom. I was nowhere truly safe from this monster. Was I doomed to forever live this nightmare of knocking? But wait, the knocking had changed once again. I silently listened as the knocking continued. Knock. Yes, it had changed. At my front door, it had been 3 knocks with a 3-second pause. At my hallway door, it was 2 knocks with a 2-second pause. And now it was just 1 solitary knock, followed by a single second of silence. Knock. The sound echoed almost as if it were confirming the dreadful theory that had begun to take shape in my mind. 3, 2, 1, and then 0. I thought. But what did 0 mean? I had no interest in finding out. But what could I do? I recalled the creature telling me the same thing. I was powerless, helpless against whatever it chose to do to me. Too weak to stop it. Knock. Once more I scanned my room. Not for any weapons, fighting back would be impossible, I now realized, but for ways I could potentially escape its grasp. Knock. Nothing. Nothing except the window which I had almost fallen through. Now was the only option that could put distance between me and the monster. Knock. Getting off my bed, I reached the window and looked outside, down towards to the ground. It was too dark to see anything, but I knew that a fall at this height could break a bone or worse. But I had no other options. Knock. Stealing my resolve, I took a shaky breath and then climbed onto the windowsill, body shaking as I did so. With a last look back at my room, I jumped. The cold air rushed past me as gravity took hold, and a fleeting doubt crept into my mind. Had I made the right choice? But no, I would be safer this way, out of reach from the creature, even if it meant taking this terrifying leap. Something wasn't right. Knock. How long had I been falling? Time seemed to stretch, but the sound of that knocking, persistent, maddening, still echoed in my ears. Why could I still hear it? Knock. I struggled to make sense of what was happening as I tumbled through the air, spiraling into a seemingly endless abyss. No matter how long I fell, it felt like I wasn't getting any closer to the ground. The descent stretched on, an unrelenting void with no end in sight. Knock. But that knocking, that horrible sound which ate away at my sanity, continued still, seeming to taunt me as I tumbled through the air. I had no idea how far I'd fallen, or how much distance I'd covered. But what I did know was that after what felt like an eternity, I finally hit the ground. The impact was jarring, the pain of being crushed against the earth, almost a relief compared to the agonizing uncertainty of the fall. Knock! And throughout all of this, the knocking continued, never once decreasing in volume or faltering in its rhythm. Knock. As I struggled to keep my eyes open, I saw the creature once again above me, preparing to consume me like it had done before. And then, my vision went black. I don't know if there's anyone out there reading this. My Wi-Fi and cell service are both down, and it's always dark outside. I fear I'm the only one left in this world. During my escape attempts, I saw no signs of life. No people, no houses, nothing but emptiness. It's always 3:15 and I grow neither tired nor hungry. Time feels suspended. I'm stuck in this strange, unending moment, and I can't tell if I'm the last one alive or if there was never anyone here to begin with. And yet, I still hope someone's out there reading my account right now. And I don't know how much longer I can last here. If time has stopped for me alone, then maybe telling you all of this is pointless. But I'll do it anyway. Writing this down is the only way I can preserve what little sanity I have left. My battery is dying, so I fear I'll be stuck alone with no ways to contact the outside world or distract me anymore. For the thing that scares me the most is not the constant darkness, or the isolation, or even the absence of life around me. No, the thing that scares me the most is the constant knocking now coming from under my bed. Knock. I'm a police officer that quit his job after a paranormal experience. I'm not a superstitious person. I didn't believe in ghosts or demons until now. Yeah, stuff happens that can't be explained. But I just want you all to know that it took more than a couple of flying spoons or a door opening on its own to scare me out of my job. Since the department didn't find any reason to keep this police report confidential, I will now detail you everything I can on what happened on the scariest night of my life. We had just received word from dispatch to check out a noise complaint in a small neighborhood whose name I will not disclose for their privacy. It was me and my partner. Let's call him Paul and he'll go by Mike. We arrived sometime after midnight. The street is dead. Everyone is sound asleep at this point. We park our patrol car in front of the aforementioned house and exit the vehicle. We knock on the door and let our presence known. Police. Is anyone home? A little rill, 8 to 10 in appearance, opens the door and peeks through the gap. Hey, I crouch to make myself less intimidating. Is your parent or guardian home? She shakes her head. My first thought was that she probably had the TV a little too high and woke up the neighbors. But before I could tell her to stay inside and lock the doors then part, I heard the sound of crashing silverware coming from what I presumed would be the kitchen. The entire house was nearly pitch black. The girl answering the door and shaking her head let me know she was alone. Which makes whoever made that noise an intruder as far as it concerns me. I ask the girl to step outside and turn to Paul. Paul, why don't you give her one of those lollipops you like to suck on when you're nervous? Paul gave me a cold stare as the girl giggled. They went to go wait by the car as I slowly pushed the door all the way open. Police, if there is anyone in this house, please let yourself be known. Without a warrant, I had no right to enter the building. I tried my best to spot whoever made the noise, but it is too dark to see. Just any sign of a threat, and I would be justified to search the house. But nothing. I left the door open and headed back towards Paul and the girl. Hey again. I don't think we introduced ourselves. I'm Officer Mike. This is my partner Paul. If I may ask, what is your name? Maribel. That's a pretty name. So Maribel. Again, if I may ask, where is your family? As soon as I had finished my sentence, the television in the living room turned on, volume fully up. Me and Paul quickly turned in surprise and could see the television playing static from outside. We put Maribel in the back seat of the patrol car for her safety, as no civilians were allowed in the front seats. We then, against our better judgment, enter the house. We tried every switch in the house, but no lights came on. While wandering the house cautiously, I would catch a person standing in the mirrors. I thought it was Paul, but every time I looked behind me, Paul was nowhere to be found. As I returned to the front door along with Paul, we both jumped as running footsteps echoed down the hall. We detached our firearms and aimed it at the source. The footsteps got louder and got closer, but no one ever appeared physically. Lamps, chairs, and other stuff started getting thrown around by an invisible force as the footsteps reached us. We sprinted out of the house and waited by the front yard. The footsteps seemed to stop, followed by the police siren that went off. I ran to the car and silenced the siren. I looked back at Paul, who seemed shooked. You all right, Paul? He takes a lollipop out of its package and puts it in his mouth. Yep. I opened the rear door and checked up on Maribel. You okay? She nodded her head, so I walked back to Paul. I don't know what to make of this, he said. Yeah, me neither. No, seriously. Ignore the running invisible man that knocked everything down for a second. All the family photos, pictures on the wall, he points at Maribel. She's not in any of them. So what are you thinking? The footsteps led outside. Then the siren goes off. There's a million buttons in that car. What are the chances? Paul, are you trying to tell me that Maribel is haunted? How do you explain what we just saw? I'm sure there's an explanation. The TV turns on when we take Maribel outside, prompting us to check it out. Someone or something shows up in the mirrors but ducks away. I remember wanting to shut him up. Not because he wasn't making any sense, but because he was. I know you've seen it. It was prowling around. Then it runs outside and gets in the car. Tries all the buttons. I think a ghost is trying to get to the girl. I just stood there, not sure what to say, until Paul decided to start walking back towards the house. Paul, what are you doing? It only shows up in the mirrors. That's how we find it. I followed him inside and watched as he takes a book from the counter and breaks the nearest mirror. What's the matter with you? That's someone's property. He takes a shard and hands another to me. It's not every day you get to arrest a ghost. We aimed our flashlights all over the house waiting for something to appear in the broken glass. I recall praying to God Almighty to not let anything show up, but it did. I panicked as it swung its red bony arm at my back. It ripped right through my uniform, causing me to fall forward. I dropped the glass, which broke into smaller chunks. It continued clawing at my shirt and flesh, but stopped when Paul opened fire. I heard it screech, fading as Paul helped me up. We both then hurried back outside to find Maribel missing from the back seat. It was difficult explaining what happened to the department without sounding like nut jobs. The police cameras, who we were betting on to prove our stories, had shut off the moment we entered the house. The thing, whatever it was, must have turned them off while we were unaware. The only part of our story that our police captain took seriously was the girl. The captain brought up a missing person report and asked us if this was the girl we saw. It was. It's been just a few days since I gave up the badge to save whatever little pride I could spare. I just ask to whoever reads this, and to whomever it may reach, the next time a door opens on its own or things move by themselves in your home, check the mirrors. The park should be empty. I live on the 6th floor of an apartment building. My bedroom window overlooks a large park directly across the street. That park is where I work, and it makes for a very easy commute. I only work part-time, and I do basic groundwork every single day, from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. The park opens at 8 a.m. every day of the year, so I also unlock the gates. I never used to be a morning person. 8 a.m. is quite early for me to be waking up, so I usually nap for an extra hour when I get back into my apartment. I'm also hired to close up. 1 hour before it closes, I have to lock up the toilets and empty all the public bins into the dumpster. 20 minutes before it closes, I have to start informing people that they should head out, as the park is closing. Once everyone is out, I go around and lock up all the gates. There are 5 in total. I stay until 30 minutes after the park is closed. Overall, I work for 2.5 hours a day. The opening shift is always 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., but the closing shift changes depending on the month. We're in December, so since it gets dark early, the park closes at 6 p.m., meaning I'm in from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. It's a pretty easy job, and for the past couple of months, I've been looking for a second job nearby. Of course, this would mean I'd have to give up my 9 a.m. hour-long power nap, but I figured I could manage. It's about time I stopped that habit anyway. I recently got into contact with a company that hands out freelance work, walk people's dogs in the neighborhood, deliver groceries, paint fences, etc. It's exactly the kind of extra work I was looking for, as it's flexible. I can change how much freelance work I do for the winter and summer months. The company is really great when you first sign up. You can give them the exact hours you are available. Last week, I opened the park up as normal and did some freelance work after. It was 5 jobs, and they were all dog walking. This meant I spent pretty much the whole day in the park for once, as that's where I tend to walk the dogs. 5 p.m. came around and I went to do all the closing shift stuff. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, and the last person was out of the park just 5 minutes after closing time. Anyone who has tried to get people out of a place that's closing will tell you that's not too bad at all. I finished up and was going to go home, but remembered that I still had one more freelance task for the day. I had to deliver a carton of 6 eggs from a local store to a place a few blocks over. Easy job. I went to the store and picked up some eggs. The job was specific on which brand it had to be. I should have probably checked the eggs, as when I tried to pay for them, the cashier apologized for the eggs being cracked and swapped them out, but I got them in the end and started making my way to the delivery address. I was walking on foot since it wasn't too far and was extremely tired. Since starting the freelance work, there have been some days that I've been able to squeeze in my hour-long power nap. This was not one of those days. It seems silly that I can't operate properly without it, but it's just something I have to get used to. What happened next? I blamed on my fatigued mind. I now know that I shouldn't have. The store and delivery address were basically perfectly 2 blocks from the park in either direction. The park was exactly in the middle, As I walked past it, I noticed something moving from deep within, through the trees. I shouted through, "Hey, the park should be empty now," but got no response. I figured it was nothing, since my view was obstructed anyway. But as I walked past one of the main gates, no longer any trees blocking my view, I could still make something out. There were no lights on in the park. Thick, dense darkness shrouded it at night. It almost feels like you should be able to reach out and touch it, like trying to walk through it would be physically impossible. Yet through it, I could make out a vaguely humanoid figure. There was no distinct color, in fact, almost a lack thereof. Just a gray, blurry blob, dancing and moving, changing and swaying. It looked familiar, perhaps like the kind of things you see when you look directly at a bright light and then away. More like an imprint on the eye than anything physical. "I work here, you need to leave. It's trespassing." The way that it didn't respond or even seem to move at my request, I decided I was just being silly. I think we've all seen things in the dark before, especially when we're tired. So, as uneasy as I was feeling in that moment, I continued to walk past the park. The full journey along that side is about 3 minutes, and I spend most of it looking inwards through the fence. It seemed to move with me. I didn't pay a lot of attention to where I was walking, and nearly tripped over a few times, especially when I nearly walked directly into a black cat. I made my way to the delivery address, delivered the eggs, and head back home. I live right in the middle of that side of the park, so another 2 minutes of being able to peer in. I didn't spot the figure at first. I walked past someone who lives on my street, and we stopped to chat, as we do occasionally. He was coming back from the same store I had been to, with some cleaning supplies. I asked why he desperately needed those, and he just said that he needed to clean a mess in his kitchen. I laughed. It must be a hard job if you need that much. I felt calmer, again now. I had human contact. There's something so eerie about darkness. Being in the dark, thinking I saw something. It just made me feel so alone. Having a conversation is what I needed. We said goodbye, and I continued walking for the last minute of my journey. But right as I got to my apartment building, I turned around before I opened the door and almost collapsed from fear. Right up against the fence, clear as day, was a tall gray thing. It looked less humanoid this close up, less like it was dancing and swaying, and more like it was shaking and convulsing. Its gray skin was pulsing and shifting in a way that almost made me not notice the complete lack of eyes. I only realized it had no eyes when eyes began to form, right on its face. Its skin seemed to open on the head, allowing for 2 grotesque eyes to pierce through. I caught myself falling slightly and got through the building door. I didn't wait for the elevator. I ran up the stairs and didn't look back. I got to the 6th floor, got into my place, and peered out my bedroom window. There was nothing at the fence, and it almost spooked me just as much to see a lack of anything there. Like I was crazy. For the past week, I've phoned in sick to my park job. My boss keeps asking if I even had the energy to just lock and unlock the gates. I keep claiming I don't. I continue to do my freelance work during the bright hours, just hoping my boss and colleagues don't spot me. I just don't want to be in the park in the dark again. I've not even so much as peered out my bedroom window at night. But this morning I tried. Today, at about 4 a.m., I got up to go to the toilet. As I was about to get back into bed, I just felt like I should peer out again. I did, and I saw it, right up against the fence, shaking, convulsing and pulsing, like it was almost trying to pass through the bars. Maybe it's just because I'm 6 floors up and couldn't see it properly, but sometimes it even looked like parts of it were passing right through the solid metal of the fence. I spotted a woman walking down the street on her phone. I saw she was carrying a carton of eggs, and then it clicked. I've seen her around before. I was pretty sure she worked for the same freelance company as me, but she was about to walk right past the figure. Could she not hear it? I realized at that moment that I must be crazy. Nobody else can even see this thing. Then it grabbed her. Right as she walked past, it grabbed her. After that, they both vanished into the darkness. I don't mean to say the figure ran off. They quite literally vanished. They morphed until they were nothing, as if this thing was able to just conjure up ways to move that were beyond comprehension. I was half sure that I was asleep at that point. By then, I noticed, pulled up on the side of the road nearby, a black car. A man and woman stood next to it, looking directly at the figure, talking about something to each other. It brought an odd sense of slight relief to know I wasn't the only person seeing this. I knew them from somewhere, but couldn't quite put my finger on where. But then it dawned on me. They were the first people I met from the freelance company. They just watched in silence as one of their employees was abducted in front of them by a paranormal figure, no less. They must be involved somehow. I don't know how or why, but they must be. Everything going on in my life suddenly slotted together. I just haven't figured out how yet. My park job, my freelance job, this figure. How do they all connect? Today the woman was on the local news, reported as missing. I can't do anything. Who is going to believe me? If I tell anyone, I suddenly become the prime suspect. I do have another freelance job today though. I now know the job is dangerous, and that my bosses do not have my best interests in mind at all, but they can't know that I know. My only job today is to paint a fence white. Usually, I only have to do some of the fence. Someone comes along after to do the rest. I'm going to write something to warn them. And then I'm going to quit. I've scheduled this to post in a few weeks, so that I can be long gone before the company knows I've said this all. If I quit, they can't hurt me, but they can still hurt others. I hope whoever sees my warning takes it seriously, and that I make a difference in some way. I worked at an amusement park. things are scarier than they seem in the dark.